Hello, everyone. My name is Taran Matharu, and I'm the New York Times bestselling author of the Summoner series, the Contender series, and the Soulbound saga, and which the first one, Dragon Rider, is out now. I'm making this video because I've recently uh, written up a theory, uh, which I wanted to release just before season 3, which I have done, to make all of my predictions for what's going to happen on the show over the next seasons. It's my overall theory of the show, and all it is predictions. Because I don't have time. I didn't have time before season 3 came out to put together all the clues as well as my predictions together to explain all my thinking. It was just a Herculean task, as you may find when you're watching my video, if you do watch it, that it's about 18,000 words long. So if I had to also explain every single clue to every single thing, it would have basically been a novel. So in any case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to read through my Reddit theory. And the other reason for me making this video is because I am locking in my theory now. I want this to be my pre-season 3 theory. And I know that if I get lots of things right, some people may suspect that I've edited it after the fact. So something happens on the screen and then I go in and change it and say, hey, I predicted it. So the reason for this video as well is because YouTube will show the dates that it came out. You can see here the date, Sunday, 22nd of September. So it's, I think the episode comes out today. I'm going to watch it this evening. But yeah, so I'm going to run through my theory. I'm going to read through it. So I will lock it in. Everyone will know I won't be editing it. The only things I may change are the images. I might add in some images to make it more of an interesting read, because it is just walls and walls of text. So I may go through and add a few images. I may improve some images as well. And as I get things wrong, I will probably go and strike through those things just to show that I got it wrong, but I'm still leaving it in there so people can see what I got wrong as well. Okay, so let's run through the theory. I'm going to share screen. So hopefully you can see that. So I think I'm about to talk for an hour and a half. Anyone who wants to comment can, but I haven't told anyone. I'm probably streaming this on my own right now with no one watching. It's pretty early in the morning in the United States, where most of the From fans are. So anyway, I'm gonna do this live stream and hit publish, and hopefully that will be a record of my predictions. So let's go through it. All right, so Taran Matharu Theory Part 1, Tarot, Cabot's Odyssey, and the Witch's Gambit, a Newfoundland fairy tale of secret orders, mythic artifacts, and evolving cycles. From my favorite show of all time. I've never been much of a Reddit user, a Discord user, or a show theorist, or indeed a YouTuber. I say this as I'm on YouTube, before I watched the first season of From. But here I am, about to write an 18,000 word series on my overall predictions from season 3 onwards, and we'll be working on a series of YouTube presentations, the first of which is this one, where my theory is explained over the next year, and hopefully all the way through until season 6 comes out. So above all, I love that From presents itself as a puzzle to be solved. I mean, you see that on the show all the time, people doing jigsaw puzzles, people doing board games, people doing, like, there's riddles on the show. They, Jade's constantly talking about how to solve the puzzles. So is Ethan, so is Jim. So in any case, so I love it because it presents itself like a puzzle. And as I've been trying to solve the clues on the show, I've had so much fun. I've been learning about mythology, religion, folklore, traditions, secret societies, literature, music, art, and philosophy, as well as European and American history along the way. So I think a lot of people think, people who have been reading my theories, they think that all the stuff I'm talking about is stuff I'm super interested in, history, mythology, and I have found it super interesting, but this was not stuff I knew before I started watching From. The vast majority of this theory is stuff I had to learn on my own. I'm British, and most of this is rooted in American history, and I never really took a huge interest in American history up until this point. So I had to learn a lot. Anyway, this series of posts will not include the deductive reasoning I used to come to my conclusions, and will not reference the clues either, though I will link to some Reddit posts I have made in the past. So here are some of them below. I may add in some more later, but again, I will only ever potentially add stuff. I will never remove stuff I got wrong, and I will never add theories that I didn't have, but I may make some minor tweaks. Again, this is a record, so you can see what I changed. So here are some links to theories where I do explain the clues if you want a little preview. And there's 2 YouTube videos of a very out-of-date version of this theory that got a lot of views on YouTube. So feel free to watch those. And you can find these links on the Reddit post itself if you want to look that up. So as much as I would love to, I simply don't have time to edit together the clips, screenshots, and quotes to explain all the clues before next season, and I want to get it on the record. In case I've solved enough of the show at this point to be the one that solves the puzzle at season 2. So like Tom and Jade said, Tom said, "You really think you're going to be the guy that solves this thing?" And Jade says, "You're goddamn right I am." Well, I'm sort of channeling Jade here. I think that substantial sections of this theory will correct at the moment, just based on the things I keep seeing coming up on the show in season 1 and 2. We'll see how much I get right. I think a lot of it will be wrong as well, but that's all part of the fun. So anyway, I will not be editing these posts other than to add images and cross through parts I got wrong for ease of reading after September 22nd. So I haven't edited this since I locked it in very, very early this morning. And I encourage skeptics to screenshot if they doubt me. If this theory turns out to be mostly wrong, I will be very happy to eat crow, if you'll pardon the pun, as the show unfolds, and admit to experiencing an extreme case of pareidolia, which is when you're seeing patterns where they do not exist. So for the avoidance of doubt, in case I get so much right, this is quite unlikely, but for the avoidance of doubt, in case I get so much right and people think that I've got some sort of secret connection to the show, I've never met, spoken with, or received any real direct interaction from the showrunners as far as I know. I think I very briefly got a single reply from Jack Bender once, but that's about the extent of it. And then he didn't reply again. Very busy man and a great man. I very much love his work, but that's about the extent of it. I'm a British fantasy novelist who works 2 other jobs. I run a publishing company. I also work for my family. And I have no real connections with the US film industry beyond my book to film representatives. With whom I could count the number of times I've spoken on one hand, and I've never met them in person. So I've not read a leaked script. In fact, there's people who find all sorts of stuff that I have no idea how they find it. And they, I try and avoid spoilers as much as I can. But I don't know where people get this stuff from, but I certainly haven't read any kind of leaked script. And I think this will be fairly evident by the amount of stuff I'm going to get wrong. A lot of this is going to be wrong. So it'll get less and less accurate. Sort of the deeper into my theory I go. Because it's almost like a sort of a foggy view, and the further, I actually think it kind of works in reverse. Actually, I think I'm going to get more wrong at the start and then more right as time goes by. But so it's kind of a reverse foggy view, or long-sightedness. But any case, so I don't know them. I've not read a leaked script. It'll become less accurate. I also want to acknowledge that much of this theory will be incorrect. Most of the clues here resolve to ingredients. So historical mythological figures, places, objects, a few traditions, and like activities like witch torture methods and things like that. There's sort of stuff related to like celebrations of various cultures from around the world. But they mostly are a recipe of like things. And then you have to put a story together to try and stitch it all together. So the narrative framework that forms the connective tissue between the clues' answers comes from deductive reasoning and wider historical and mythological context. So you have to sort of take the stories that these things are rooted in and try and figure out how they all fit together. But there's many ways to skin a cat, and also there's the clues are so vague that there will be a number of false positives and coincidences. Like it may be that it looks like something's correct, but it's just a coincidence that those keywords connected to them. So yeah, there will be, and also I do make some fairly speculative connections here, or it's all part of the fun. So a lot of my sort of speculative stuff, particularly around like Eloise and Tabitha and the bracelet, it's very speculative stuff, but it's fun to do that as well. But also a lot of the historical figures I reference, I know for a fact that some of them will be false positives, but I've included every one just in case one, if there's one that I'm like, this could be right, could be wrong, I'm putting it in just in case it's right. I'd also like to note, I will make statements in this theory without saying, in my opinion, I believe, I think, and I know that can rub people the wrong way. you can just take that as a given. It's just a lot easier to just say what I think is happening and what will happen. And it may annoy you with how much confidence I speak this in. That's why I've written this whole thing, to explain. A lot of this will be wrong. I'm not saying that I'm going to be 100% right. It's literally impossible for someone to be incredibly right. And I've already been wrong about a few things. But anyway, this Reddit series does not intend to spoil the show for others, if I am correct. And that is why I'm putting a major spoiler warning here at the start of every upcoming post. Even though I'm sure some people will find it super arrogant to assume that my theory might contain spoilers. And I get that. It is, you do have to think quite highly of your ability to solve the show to write as intensive a theory such as this. And that may rub people the wrong way. But if I am right, and I do feel I'm right about certain segments, I think are pretty much undeniable. Like the tarot card stuff, I think is pretty undeniable. The John Cabot stuff, I think I've literally found so much to connect to it that I think it's impossible I'm wrong. So I'm just giving you guys a warning about that. Because I do feel like I might spoil it for some people, and I don't want to. So I'm putting a spoiler warning, even though it may come across the wrong way. But if you do love From, and you would love to see like someone have a grand theory and then watch it to see if that theory is correct, and you can laugh at me when I get things terribly wrong. You can celebrate with me when I get things right. I'm locking this in. So as things come up on the show, I can come back to it and be like, look, I got that part right. That's what a theorist wants to do. I admit it. I want to be right about stuff. I think it'll be funny when I'm wrong about stuff. We'll see. I've got loads of bets with Tony Teflon. It's all part of the fun. All right, so this is going to be an appropriate time, perhaps, to share these quotes from the showrunners, because some people are probably watching this thinking, there's no way it's that deep. It can't be that deep. There's no way that you could write 18,000 words of prediction based on the clues we have. So all I'm going to say is this. Griffin said, you can have the most thorough mystery box. You can have something more clever than you've ever seen. And then Pinkness said, there's clues all along the way about how it was going to end. We feel very confident that we have all of that. Will some people guess it? Maybe. And they'll be satisfied in how clever and astute they were. Most people will not. So all of that being said, I do want to share my methodology with you so that you can have some context to understand, how I've come to identify as many clues as I have, and then to be able to think I could predict so much. Clearly there's a whole bunch of clues that everyone must be missing if I can write something like this and everyone thinks it's nonsensical and I'm having some sort of hallucination. So let me explain where all these clues are coming from that are making me think all these things. Because actually, there's 3 layers of clues, and then pretty much everyone's missing the first layer. So over time, I have come to realize that the show's clues go far deeper than most folks realize, and it is possible to predict a great deal of what is to come on the show if you are able to tie the clues' answers into a potential narrative. So I would love other theorists to solve the clues themselves. So once you know how to do it, where to start, it really does all fall into place, and it's so much fun as well. If you learn all the keywords, so you can have a list of all the keywords, heart, pretend, favorite, what else? Mistake. Like, there are words that are clues in the dialogue on the show. But anyway, I'll get to that later. But once you know how to do it and you've got all these keywords and you research enough about American history and colonization and also like various mythologies, it's amazing how many mythologies are involved in the show. I encourage those to keep reading to try and reverse anything I happen to be correct on. So if, for example, in season 4, we learn that there's time travel and that I've correctly guessed some of the historical figures that are going to appear on the show, then you can reverse engineer this method, and then when you see how it works, you can use it to solve things that I haven't, because there's no way I've solved all of this. I've had to do this all on my own. Pretty much nobody is on board with me at the moment on how the clues on the show work, where to begin in terms of trying to solve this show, how to connect the gaps between what seem to be clues. No one's on board with me yet. So anyway, all of this is to say, the primary way that the showrunners hide clues is not, in fact, the background and direct references on the show, although it is a major component. The main way they hide clues is actually in the dialogue. So how I said there's 3 layers? So this is the main way. It's in the dialogue. It's in what people are saying to each other. You've got stuff hidden in the background. You've got songs and stuff. That's also part of it, actually. The entire song, not just the ones we hear on the show, but the entire song for every song that comes up is also got keywords hidden among them, which I think is fairly obvious to some people, but we'll see. So anyway, so there are words and word sets emphasized. So for example, you'll hear the phrase "the one thing" quite often on the show. This is a clue to the Emerald Tablet. We'll get into that later. But it's not just one word at a time. Sometimes it's like a few words together. And often these words, when they are a clue, if you're a writer, you'll be able to detect when something's slightly awkwardly placed. Like you can see they've used an unnatural word in that sentence, and it kind of feels a little forced in there. And often they'll just use these words repeatedly. And what's my evidence for this? Fatima says this place is trying to tell us something, but only some of us were listening closely enough to hear it. So if you listen to the dialogue on the show, if you listen to the songs lyrics, you'll be able to solve it. And that's the main way. Okay, so I'm going to try and use the example of the word okay before we launch into this whole story to explain how I think this works. So the worst culprit for keywords is the word okay. It is used over 1,044 times in the first 2 seasons. So if you took, it would take more than 35 minutes to listen to every single okay on the show if it took 2 seconds to say the word okay each time. More than one in every 85 words is okay. And it's funny, people complain on Reddit sometimes saying, oh my God, these guys, they use the same phrases over and over again. Why do they keep saying okay? Why do they keep, saying that things are fine? Well, that's because fine, the word fine is a clue on the show. And so is the word okay. So they keep using these phrases. And the same swear words, by the way, as well. It's the same set of swear words, which are also clues, as far as I can tell. Every single, even the Emma Effa word, that is a clue to an event where someone sleeps with someone else's mother, I believe. So anyway, so these are the 100 most common words in the English language. You can click through if you want. Here's 1,000. So these are links that say these are the most common words. So if you see a word being used all the time on the show, and it's a really common word in the English language, it's more likely that it's coincidence that it's coming up so often. But okay isn't on either of these lists. So let's look at an example of a conversation where the word okay is being used at the end of every line, and it's being used in every way that the word okay is used. So Boyd says, I won't be here to tell you that it's okay. So I'm telling you now, man, it's okay. And that you are my son, mine, and I love you, and I'm proud of the man you have become. And not a single day goes by when that hasn't been true. Okay, Ellis. Yeah, it's okay. And then Boyd, okay. It's just, they're banging you over the head with it here. So yeah, in this case, I would share that 2 of the things this clue references. So if you see them on the show, you'll know this methodology is correct. This is my benchmark. This is I'm certain about these 2 things coming up on the show. So if they come up on the show, everything I'm saying here about the methodology, I think would be proven true. So here's your spoiler warning. For anyone who's just listening to the start of this, and then is going to drop off because they're worried they'll be spoiled. I'm about to click it. Okay. So the 2 things I think are Okay Ito, who was the first ever Japanese person to live and die in the United States. And I also think it's to do with the shootout of the OK Corral in the 1880s timeline of the show. So that's why I think the word okay is used so often, because it's a clue to several things. And there's probably another 1 or 2 things that the word okay references. Potentially, because I think just 2 things isn't enough to use it this much. So I think it also may be a clue to the Scottish accent, which may relate to a Scottish character in the origin story, Och-I. But who can say? All right, so these keywords, they point to key events, key historical figures, key objects, places, traditions, and things like that in history. But it goes further than this. So when you're trying to solve a mystery, you have to make an assumption. Okay, I've solved this clue. I'm locking it in. Now let me see what connects to it. So that's what I've been trying to do. And that's the only way to do it. If you only ever solve a first layer of clues, you're only ever going to have a surface level solve. You need to take a first layer, accept that you're correct about certain things, and then move to the next layer, the things that connect to it. So for example, if you don't believe that the whole show centers around the island of Newfoundland, it's pretty much impossible to solve the entire show. And it all sort of flows from there, which I'll get onto in a bit. So you have to pick an answer to a clue you're certain of, and then as you might use a jigsaw piece, and even Jay talks about this, you solve the next clue that connects to it. So he says you have to find two pieces that connect. So indeed, the showrunners have left chains of clues for people to follow as they research, connecting one solved clue to the next in a cascading series of answers. So this first layer of clues, they typically target specific keywords on Wikipedia pages for most of these answers. And solving the clues feels a little bit like the wiki game. The wiki games, when you try and sort of your challenge, you start on one page and you're challenged to get to a different Wikipedia page, and you're not allowed to type anything in. You can only click on Wikipedia links to get from one to the next. And some people they do it on YouTube. It's quite fun to watch. It feels a little bit like that, although it's not always one that you have to click. You still have to sometimes search up someone that's mentioned in the Wikipedia, but maybe it doesn't link to them. But generally, that's how it works. It's pretty interesting. And sometimes the Britannica page has some pretty good information on there, but I'm not sure. I think it's mainly centered around Wikipedia. Okay, and certainly the first page of Google results. There is some deeper stuff, but I'll get into that later. So for the most important pages on these clue chains, these Wikipedia pages, you can literally check if you're on the right track by picking words, word sets, and sound alikes that jump out at you on the Wikipedia page you're on and searching for them in the dialogue or from. So like I said earlier, the one thing, I'm going to use that as an example. You can see you're researching the Emerald Tablet for other reasons. You've been led to there from other clues and context on the show. And then you're on the Wikipedia page for the Emerald Tablet, and you see that the Emerald Tablet supposedly had written on the back this phrase that was all about this, the one thing. So when you go on the transcripts for From, so the only way to solve this is if you have all the transcripts to search. Once I did that, it massively sped up my theorizing. And you'll see that the phrase "the one thing" is used. You know what? I'll look it up right now. It's used 14 times on the show. So anyway, let's keep going. Yes, so you can find these sound alikes on the Wikipedia page, and you search for them in the dialogue or from, and also in the song lyrics. I am yet to actually go through every song, take all the lyrics, and paste that into my master document to search for keywords. For example, I learned that Goodnight Little Susie, the song that plays when Kelly gets a rod through her head, Kelly... that song ends with "Your goose is cooked," and there are many connections to the word goose on this show, specifically around the game of goose, which we'll get into later. But so even if that you don't hear that word on the show itself, the remainder of the lyrics also are important. So anyway, you need to collate the subtitle files for the first 2 seasons so you can analyze the word counts on a granular level. I think if you didn't have this method, it would literally take years if you had to instead rewatch the show every time. You need to have a searchable document with all of the dialogue from in order for you to solve the show, in my opinion. Or you have to have the most amazing memory ever, which I don't. So anyway, so the second layer is other blogs and articles on the first page of Google results, but there's also a tertiary layer of chain clues that lay really deep, especially when the showrunners contrive to put historical figures together. Like, for example, there's this character called Richard Amerike, who legend says America was named after this Welsh guy, which is why we see daffodils keeping popping up on the show, which I'll get into later. But Richard Amerike, I learned from deep research and reading about him in I even read books about this topic. I found out that he had an Icelandic servant, and that's not something that just pops up on his Wikipedia page, but you will find that there's a really interesting article in a book written about how he is one of the examples of an English person who had an Icelandic slave around the late 15th century. So there are like solves you can make by reading deeper, and they give you the context that you need to have like a really accurate prediction of how the origin story flows. But yeah, generally it's the first page of Wikipedia to do like the high level solves, and then you have to go deeper. So another really interesting thing is often certain clues are held up as red herrings. So and I don't think that they do red herrings on this show, at least not in the way it's traditionally done. But what I think they do is they occasionally insert a clue that many will interpret one way, but in fact is a clue to something else. So, for example, one might assume the reference to building a spaceship is a clue to aliens and sci-fi. You know, Tony Teflon, his theory is the alien theory. Fair play to him. You know, I wrote an entire book series involving aliens, and I think they're awesome. But you know, so that's what you're supposed to think. But in my opinion, it is actually a clue to, and again, spoilers for anyone who's trying to avoid spoilers. But I mean, at this point, I think it's time to drop off. So either H.G. Wells or Jules Verne, they're both considered to be the first in history to write a book that includes a spaceship, and in both books, the characters spend a lot of time building their spaceships. And both of these guys are actually part of the mythology of From. So you're going to see throughout the series over the next probably 4 or 5 seasons, references to like literary figures and poets and scientists in from history, basically, and it's all about them passing objects between each other across time. But we'll get into that later. So I believe that actually that's a clue to H.G. Wells or Jules Verne, maybe both. They both show up, so it's hard to tell which. So I'd also be remiss to say that the actors, I think what likely happens is they're given a list of words and emojis by John Griffin and Jeff Pinkner and Jack Bender, and they share these clues in their social media posts and stories, often through the use of seemingly random emojis, keywords, and the subject matter of their photos, even numbers in the background, and the stickers on their trailer posters with their names on them. Have so many amazing clues. You know, if you're one of the actors watching this for whatever reason, and actually, I think if I am right, the showrunners would not want you watching this, and maybe because they're specifically keeping things from you, so that you can do your job better. So that's just my thinking there. But if you are one of the actors, I would so appreciate if you could share the stickers on your poster at the end of filming, not in a story, but in an Instagram post, because I don't use Instagram that often. So yeah, and unfortunately, I only realized this recently. So most of my theory doesn't benefit from all these stories with clues hidden in them. And you know, they even sometimes delete stuff. So sometimes I imagine they might make a post where they think they're sharing a clue that the showrunners would approve of, and then the showrunners are like, "Hey, that's a little too obvious. Delete that." And I think that's something that happened with Ricky He. I think not only did he befriend a lot of actors in a time travel portion of the show this season, but potentially, and so they were all interacting on each other's pages, and maybe they thought that would give too much away. But yeah, he had to delete a bunch of stuff recently, so I thought that was interesting. I think my favorite one that they've done is that they did an escape room and they called themselves the 78% Club. And then also there's a picture that the actor who plays Ellis Cortion shared, where he's sitting with the number 78 between him and one of his friends on like a pier in Canada somewhere. So I thought that was pretty cool. So it's that sort of thing. 78 is the number of cards in a tarot deck, if you're curious. Okay, so I believe many theorists are also stuck on the first hurdle because there is a specific location where most of the first clue chains cascade from. And Jade tells us there's usually some sort of prompt to let you know which direction to go. This is when he thinks it's an escape room, right? And then later, Jim writes a wall of questions, and the first thing he writes, would be the prompt, right? And then he circles it and then points to it. I think even taps it, and he says, "This is where we begin." And what is that question? That question is, where are we? And this is the first clue everyone needs to solve first to solve this. So I believe this answer to get theorists started. I don't think this is a spoiler because, frankly, I mean, it's in the description of my post. It's Newfoundland. You know, Newfoundland is where this entire thing centers around. And I know people are going to say, well, everyone's from the United States. You know, it's got nothing to do with Canada. Why do you think it's Newfoundland? I'll get into that later. But that is the unfortunately, this first hurdle, everyone's stuck on it. You know, maybe it sounds crazy and rude to say that, but you know, the showrunners, they portray these various like mysterious islands from different world mythologies, and they use Newfoundland like in the real world as if it was that mysterious island, you know, that was going by another name at the time. So like Egyptian Punt, the island of Punt in Egyptian mythology is Newfoundland in this series. The island of the sirens that Odysseus goes past is in this scenario Newfoundland. So anyway, Um, and I believe so I believe the answer is Newfoundland, and they're using it as a medium to tell the story of the colonization of North America and the evolution of our religions and mythologies. Jim also says when that solving the mystery will be like telling a story. And even Ethan said, you need to put all the pieces together so that it makes a story. When they're looking at all the pictures that Julie has that Victor gave her. And then now I'm going to leave you with one more thought. Whenever John Griffin is asked when he came up with the idea for From, he always mentions 9/11. But what does that really have to do with From? And here's a quote from him. I remember in the aftermath, people, myself included, were looking around, walking around. It was that moment in our lives that we all experienced differently. And so, did you know, as famously told in Canada's biggest ever Broadway show, Come From Away, that scores of Atlantic flights and thousands of passengers, they were diverted to a single tiny town called Gander. And is it interesting that the word gander is connected to the word goose, goose for the gander, in Newfoundland. It's this tiny town in Newfoundland on 9/11. And the townsfolk, they opened their homes, they brought the passengers blankets and tea, and they were stuck there for days, unable to leave. Sound familiar? Did the young writer John Griffin fall in love with the people, history, and mythology of Newfoundland after finding himself trapped in a place he never thought he'd visit during a profound, terrifying, and surreal moment in his life? You can imagine him there, trapped, of this place he never thought he'd be, this remote island off the coast of Canada, although it's enormous and fascinating, but it's sort of forgotten by many people. And then he's there and he learns about this amazing history of this place and the amazing culture and the warm-hearted people. And he thinks, wow, I want to write a story about this. It must be fate. Fate brought me to this island. This is going to be the story I make. So I think he fell in love with the history and mythology of Newfoundland. Interestingly, the Bear Talk Center, I think I'm pronouncing that right. I've asked a few people. I've watched a few videos. It seems that's how you pronounce Bear Talk. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing it wrong. But the indigenous people of Newfoundland, although I think they arrived, not so long before John Cabot arrived at Newfoundland. And I think actually it was sort of like Inuit, then Bear Talk, then Micmac, migratory. Is what my research says. I'm not an expert, so forgive me. But anyway, this local Bear Talk Center is right just north of Gander. I think it's like 40 minutes drive away. And I imagine all these people there, they might have gone to visit the local museum while they were trapped in this town and unable to leave because all the flights were grounded and it was 9/11. So the words come from and away are used 511, 168, and 61 times respectively. Now, they are common words. So that doesn't prove anything. But also interestingly, the clock in the caves when Tabitha's down there with Victor is set to 9/11. And on the show, Ellis tells Fatima, come away from the window. Just combining all three words in come from away. Okay, so a little preview of kind of why I think the show is called From. From is the story of the origins of the world's mythical and religious stories and their cyclical nature, the archetypal characters that feature therein, all told through the lens of North American history and the island of Newfoundland, as well as the canon of Western historical creators involved in the evolution of literature, art, science, music, and philosophy. And I think what it's ultimately about really is the collective human unconsciousness, so a very sort of Jungian concept related to how it's a part of the human condition to have these sort of archetypal shared common mythologies and worldviews. So it's really all about how even people from all over the world, religions and mythologies and histories and traditions as well, like celebration traditions, is going to highlight all the similarities between all of these things to show that we are more alike than we know. And I think that's a beautiful message. And that's what I think this show is about. And here's my final answer preview. What is Fromland? So if you don't want to sit through this entire theory video where I imagine I'm going to be speaking for like 2 hours, 2.5 hours, sorry. Let's see, could even be longer. I'm going to try and stop going off on tangents and over explaining things as I go, because it's the weekend. I really want to watch the first episode of season 3. I'm waiting to get this video out before I do to play fair. I'm not even sure if I can watch it yet. But in any case, I want to get this out. So yeah, if you don't listen to any of this theory, but you just want to see what is this guy talking about, what does he think is going to happen, I'm going to sum up my theory in a single sentence, very long run-on sentence, but a sentence nonetheless. And I'm going to give it a crack, and I'm going to make it sound as crazy as possible, just for fun. So I've taken the most jarring aspects of my theory, put them all together, and it honestly sounds like a fever dream. It really does. And this is why I've actually been getting, the common reaction to this theory on Reddit, other than to downvote it, is to say I have a drug problem, is to say I have a mental health problem, or to claim I've got some sort of learning disability, or some sort of neurodivergence that has made me do this. And I kind of get it. It's a really rude thing to say to people. And I've also received like death threats, people telling me to unalive myself. Yeah, I've even had been reported to Reddit as someone who might be in danger. It's not been a terribly fun experience on Reddit. That is not to say that the community for From is not a very warm and welcoming community. It absolutely is. I think it's just the nature of the internet, and I imagine it's just one very deeply unhappy, unpleasant person behind most of it. But yeah, anyway, I just wanted to highlight that a little bit as well before I continue. And you may see that most of this theory on Reddit, even though my original theory, where I use all the clues to explain a much older version of this theory, is the most liked theory on Reddit, the one where I just make predictions and I don't explain it, I think is now one of the most disliked theories on Reddit. It's interesting how these things work, and I'll be interested to see how much I get right and how that might change the way people have reacted to it. But anyway, here we go. So Fromland is an ancestral curse that once held Ben Franklin, Frank Sinatra, the Bearded Lady, Henry Morgan the Pirate, Crazy Horse, located beneath Cape Race Lighthouse, contained in a broken bottle of urine and holy nails, wrapped in a witch's ladder of artifacts, where medieval board games and tarot games are played in a mirrored Canadian and US Fromlands, maybe Mexico in there as well, between 4 players from a set of 7 evolving beings from a dozen mythologies and religions, which include Christian, Greek, Hebrew, Egyptian, Arthurian/Welsh, Irish, Dante's Hell and Purgatory and Heaven, actually, Templar, Cathar, Norse, Indigenous Canadian, Modern Canadian. All of these mythologies are covered in these beings. Sorry, I'll keep going. That began their lives as 3 fallen angels, Shamsiel, Sariel, and Azazel. Canaan, Cain, and Sarai. So Cain is the boogeyman. That symbol we see is the mark of Cain. Lilith, Lilith's demonic children, known as the Lilin, and in which Donna acts as a giant spider's human avatar and Bigfoot's ally, aided by the tree ghost of centuries-old Bridget of York, a former pregnant nun, English princess, and cunning folk woman who took part in pagan international celebrations and endured a witch's trial that included a penalty of the peach administered by a mad homophobic priest who faked his death, all while marooned in Newfoundland, following an escape with her brother and pretender to the throne, Perkin Warbeck, after he was broken out of the Tower of London by John Cabot, Eloise, aka Tabitha's mom's ancestor. I'm going to change that in a bit potentially, because I'm starting to think that I might be wrong about that. But let's see. I sort of have 2 theories for that. That's my main one at the moment. And the secretive order of the Brotherhood of Death, at the behest of Philip the Handsome, spurring warring Rosicrucian orders founded by Da Vinci, safeguarding and seeking objects across time, including Bridget's who is the inspiration for Esmeralda on the show somehow, from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. So Bridget's devil's forehead, Urim, Emerald, Tablet, Cathar, Holy Grail, Philosopher's Graal Stone, once sought by a gay Jewish Nazi SS officer who loved Himmler, that was given to Elizabeth I by an occult magician and passed between writers, artists, inventors, musicians, and scientists, including Stephen King, Monty Python, and David Bowie, like a historical sisterhood of the traveling pants, inspiring works through dreams, including Lost, Cthulhu, Alice in Wonderland, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and it was all dreamed up by John Griffin when he was trapped in Gander, Newfoundland on 9/11. Yeah. So I imagine all of the above seems extremely far-fetched given what we've seen so far, but it's my hope that the rest of the theory will help explain how I picture it playing out, even if it doesn't explain the clues that led me to these conclusions. And I will continue with predictions for season 3. So, next section. So this is actually the section that I think I'm going to get the most wrong on. I've done a lot of soul searching in the last sort of 3 weeks or so, and I had a version of this where the first version I posted of this had all of my like crazy tinfoil theories in it. Then I edited it like a few days ago, and just like separated out the tinfoil, as in like, this is all my tinfoil, this is the stuff I'm confident on. And then I've just decided to like remove most of the tinfoil, but acknowledge that I thought these things for a while, just to make it flow better rather than having it full of like sort of slightly zany predictions that probably won't come true. But I've scattered them through, and I think it reads a lot better now. So anyway, so here's my predictions for how season 3 will play out. So in Fromland, the food rots, even in the soil. People begin to panic. Elgin may have a vision of a creepy hobo clown or other historical figure. I just think that they have to have a ghost clown at some point because they're so scary and it makes such a great vision. If we only ever see clowns as historical figures, it won't be as scary and creepy, in my opinion. So anyway, then it begins to snow. Jade, Victor, Mrs. Liu, Boyd, Fatima. Sorry, I don't mean Fatima anymore. That's an old version of my writing. Fatima will not be there. It'll be Boyd, Mrs. Liu, Victor, and Jade. Try to get the animals inside after the monsters release them. I might edit that later. I'm going to make a little tweak there. Tinfoil, for a while, I thought there might be an eclipse instead at this point. It may occur instead later in the season or even in season 4. I've made some predictions later in this theory about whereabouts this eclipse might happen. I think it might actually happen on the day of the massacre for Victor's thing, and it will also happen in the modern day at some point. But on the night that Victor's town got killed, I think that might be an eclipse massacre. We'll see. But anyway, the monsters, they kill the livestock. Mrs. Liu dies heroically trying to save them. She's tortured to death in front of Boyd. So for a while there, I thought that this might be baby surgery for Fatima. But when, through context and sort of publicly released information, I realized that this scene happens in episode 1. I realized it must be Mrs. Liu who's getting tortured in there. So Randall must redeem himself somehow. He's obviously a main character for a while. I think, I don't know, he might risk his, I think in the trailer we see him running around outside, so maybe he goes to try and save people at some point. Kenny will destroy a jukebox after it plays a song cruelly referencing his mother's death. So, that's why he breaks it in the trailer. There'll be a funeral for her. Victor gives Ethan and Julie a hard time for not being careful enough. I think I just literally saw a preview trailer with that scene in it, so it's not much of a prediction. Fatima's worried about getting enough food for a baby, begins an accelerated pregnancy, starts losing teeth as a result. Boyd's more concerned with taking the fight to the monsters with Randall's help, perhaps wanting to trap one or go into the caves, because, Randall's the guy who wants to do stuff. Now that Jim's, off on some sort of adventure with Kenny, I imagine Randall becomes the new sort of like, trying to escape, trying to do ambitious things. So anyway, Christy steps into a bear trap near Jade. Jade and Christy see a vision and scattered red and black rocks. These represent backgammon or nard pieces. More on this later. Jim and Kenny see some Nkondi hoodoo dolls made by Aunt Caroline Dye. I'll come on to that later. And an abandoned old 1860s town where they camp overnight before returning. So, and tinfoil theory here, Christy's leg may need to be amputated because I think someone gets their leg amputated and cannibalized in the origin story. Slightly zany one there. But maybe there's a dark humor discussion of cannibalizing her leg if this happens. Very tinfoil. Again, now you can see why I cut down on some of these sort of more speculative predictions. But I'm leaving them in for fun and because I've talked about them publicly and, people should know how my mind works. I think I went a little too far with some of these tinfoils, but we'll see. So a new ambulance arrives along with a police officer called Acosta. We know, that's publicly available information. It's a trap. Acosta is tricked by the monsters to shoot out the windows of Colony House, injuring a girl. Again, that's just what I think we're seeing in the trailer. Boyd tries to save the girl by fetching the ambulance, but he's forced to make a stop with Randall. He and Randall head for the ambulance, and the monsters tease Boyd with the keys and perhaps make him choose between saving one person or another. Randall has a vision of the cicadas and falls to the ground. Even so, the monsters let him live. Now, why is that? Well, Julie and Marielle will have visions too. And over the season, this shared affliction will bring them together. We know that from some of the descriptions of the from season 3 episode, sort of like little previews on Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb. The monsters are preparing one of them to become the boogeyman's avatar, like Boyd almost was. It will end up being Marielle, who will dance ballet creepily. And I think this because of the actor's background. So this is why Martin has been kept in prison. So he was originally the boogeyman's avatar, the big bad, the guy who's basically speaking through ghost catchery, who's speaking in Sarah's mind. That's the big bad. Martin was previously possessed by him. And then Martin passes this possession over to Boyd. Boyd is about to be possessed and, have his body taken over while Catry, the boogeyman, gloats that it's about to happen. He's smiling, he's happy. I mean, I'm shocked that people don't realize this, like how he just seems so smarmy when just before Boyd passes the curse away, like when Boyd's about to be succumbed. But anyway, so Boyd passes it to Smiley using his blood, which kills Smiley. I think it's related to a curse that the boogeyman has as well. But anyway, it kills him somehow. I don't really quite understand why it kills him, but it kills him. And then the possession then bursts out and it spends itself on the town. It picks 3 alternative avatars: Randall, Julie, and Marielle. And then it picks Marielle in the end. So Boyd destroying the music box did not stop this process. I think it actually wanted him to destroy the box. Double sort of reverse psychology. But yeah, it picks Marielle in the end because it creates the most pain, a love triangle of Christy and Kenny where nobody can be together. That is why Marielle gets chosen. I think it was like, well, Julie, can't pick Julie because I don't know. I don't know why it picks Marielle, but I think it's because of this love triangle because Kenny's pain is extra juicy, and it likes it. So anyway, so back in town, they learn that Acosta's a police officer from Camden, and they learn that Tabitha escaped into the real world from her. Julie's theory. So there's a lady called Julie online. She has a YouTube channel. And she said that she noticed that Knox County was on the side of the ambulance, and that Camden, Maine, which is, in season 2, we see like the coastline of Camden, Maine through the window. She said, oh, that ambulance must come from there. And then I looked up the police patch on Camden on her patch, and I noticed that it's the same like logo, or like a sort of similar logo to, it's like a ship for Camden, Maine. So we can assume that's where she's from. Fatima receives a tarot card reading from Tilly, and I imagine if she gets a full tarot card reading, then they'll show 3 cards. So if I had to guess, I don't know this for sure, but I would guess that it was the Empress, who's her, maybe the Lovers, that's Ellis, and maybe Death, that's Mr. Liu, or the Judgment card. I don't know who the Judgment card is. I think it might be Thomas, but we'll find out later. More on this later. Okay, so Fatima continues an accelerated pregnancy and becomes really sick. There's a debate whether to give her a C-section to remove it, and this is because her double-barreled surname, one of them is Rostami, and a Rostamzad in Persian is a from the legend of Rostam, from a baby that was too big and had to be cut out in a C-section. That word Rostamzad means C-section in Persian. So I think that she's going to need a C-section, that we're going to have a really gross surgery scene in season 8. And I'm going to throw out a wild guess here. I've seen a few like sort of clues that connect to the film Alien and the making of Alien on the show. And I wonder, to get all the alien theorists excited, they're going to have a chest burster scene involving twins. Now, remember, the word Thomas means twins. I don't know how it applies on the show. I'm applying it here in my tinfoil, but we don't know who the twins are. Maybe the fallen angels, well, I'll get onto that later, but there's some sort of twins on the show, and I'm going to say maybe there's some sort of evil twin here. So it goes badly, and a changeling escapes out the window. So maybe there's like a sort of demon baby, and it like breaks through the window and off it goes. Maybe that's even why they had Colony House's window shot out, so that it could escape that way. But anyway, so and then it might even time travel in time and become the changeling that was swapped with Thomas. So it's my opinion that Thomas was swapped. That's why they use the changeling table. Very tinfoil, I know, but I think that Newfoundland fairy mythology is very much about changelings, and considering there's hints that there's something to do with Thomas. There's a lot of references to Thomas, of hearing Thomas. The boogeyman, I think, is able to call people on the phone. He's able to use phone lines in some way and radio signals. So I'm thinking that he calls the phone to distract the family so that the swap can happen, so that the changeling can die instead of Thomas, and Thomas might be in Fromland somewhere. This is why Ethan says that Thomas needs to be rescued. But anyway, so maybe that Fatima's baby becomes the changeling and is like a sort of black gooey demon baby that can morph to look like Thomas, and something like that. I don't know. All right, or like a monster baby. Anyway. So Ellis and Boyd share an emotional moment with the baby when Ellis first holds them. It's not certain that Fatima will survive this event. This is because I saw a scene in a behind-the-scenes photo shared on Instagram by one of the actors where Boyd wears a green shirt, and I think Ellis does too. And I believe when people wear green, it's to signify that they're feeling angry. So I imagine if Fatima dies, it would make them very angry. And I don't know, maybe they get in a fist fight or something because they're both wearing green, which means they're both angry at the same time. I don't know. But I think there's some sort of interaction. And also I think the actor mentions that there's some sort of interaction between he and Boyd that like everyone should look forward to seeing in the press preview thing, event that came out recently. Anyway, so Donna or someone else might reveal something suspicious. So tinfoil, maybe she has the ability to heal people. Maybe she tries to heal Fatima and fails. There's all sorts of accusations about that night. So there's going to be some sort of suspicions because of what I've read in the descriptions for later episodes on IMDb. So Jade goes into the woods, finds some Viking ruins, perhaps a tomb of some kind. Remember, Donna references a tomb in season 1 when she's smashing up a colony house with an axe. The tomb is a tomb is one of the hazards in the Game of Goose, which I think is the hazards of Game of Goose are what makes up the this area in Fromland. But anyway, so Ethan and Julie eventually go visit this tomb as well for whatever reason. Again, this is sort of hinted at in description. Victor gives Ethan his gun. I think Ethan needs to get a gun at some point because of a later prediction I'm going to make. So definitely Victor's gun ends up with Ethan. Ethan, Julie, and perhaps others leave. Indeed, it's possible everyone in town will leave out of hunger when Jim and Jay don't come back. I think what's going to happen is they need an excuse to get everyone to leave modern day Fromland so that they can change the set to look like the 1970s or the 1930s. I think when we go back any further, it doesn't work. In the 1880s, the Birdcage Theatre from Tombstone is going to be one of these buildings. So I don't know, maybe they use the same location. I'm curious about how long Colony House has been there, for example. Will we see Colony House in the 1880s? I don't know. But anyway, I think they're going to try and get everyone out of the town at some point. Either they all abandon the town and time travel, or maybe they go live in some other town, like the one that Jim and Kenny find. That is a possibility. But I think either way, the set is getting redone. This may be the last season we see modern day Fromland. Maybe everything's like sort of back in time after this. But, tinfoil. Okay, so it's possible virtually everyone time travels in some way, leaving the town abandoned, meaning the set might be changed permanently. It can't be snapping between 1978 and modern day Fromland. That's a lot of painting, then degrading, then painting. People start to notice that things look different. So I think they even filmed a lot of the time travel scenes for the 1970s when they did the Victor Massacre scene. I think that there's a whole time travel segment that's already been filmed in secret by the actors that we don't even know about. And it all happened in season 1 when people weren't paying attention. So anyway, so it's possible virtually everyone time travels. They're going to redo the set. It's possible one needs to use, so this is again tinfoil. In order to time travel, you might need to use a date from the bottle tree and hold hands to get through together to the intended time period where you both arrive at the same time. So maybe Jim is the man with the long hair and Eloise's drawings. Maybe he's the one who time travels back to the 1970s. It's also possible at some point this season, we'll see the setup of a Polchinski paradox, when someone goes back in time to try to prevent themselves from time traveling in the first place. So it's like, imagine, you time travel, you accidentally do something terrible, and then you time travel back to before you time travel and stop yourself just before you come in. It's a paradox. It's like, how would you have time traveled in the first place to stop yourself if you stop yourself in the first place, sort of thing. It's like, how does time work? So anyway, I think that someone's about to time travel. Maybe someone tries to stop themselves. Maybe they don't recognize themselves at first, but so they try and stop themselves. So if somebody on the show tries to stop someone else from time traveling, that person they're trying to stop may be the very same person. So anyway, I think that the showrunners want to get every single type of time travel paradox they can into this show. So season 4 events. In 1978, the Matthews family goes back in time with the bracelet. Martin will be there as a younger man. Julie interacts with the jock monster, who asked if she recognized him in 2022. Ethan shoots a stranger who is scaring Julie, who turns out to be a younger version of Jim's dad, creating a grandfather paradox. How could Ethan be there to kill his grandfather if his grandfather will never sire his father? A Matthews family member will give Miranda the bracelet. The Matthews family try to change the past, hence, the massacre, Miranda's death, Victor getting trapped in Fromland. But in so doing, in trying to stop it, they actually set off the chain of events that they're trying to prevent. This is called a predestination paradox. So at some point, Abby, who's also there as Victor and Eloise's childhood friend, dies holding her teddy bear. This is the blonde girl that we see with a teddy bear in so many of Victor's drawings. Meanwhile, Julie and Ethan are in danger inside the tower. Maybe this is the children that Miranda was referencing. Maybe it's Julie and Ethan. She doesn't know their names, but she knows they're there. Who knows? So maybe Julie time travels back in time. Maybe that's why the jock monster recognizes her, because he met her in this time travel segment. I'm going to have to move because my laptop's running low on battery. So just give me a moment. Okay. moving on to the bed. Sorry, guys. All right. Let's see here. All right, so the Matthews family go back in time with the bracelet. Martin will be there as a younger man. Julie interacts with the jock monster who asked if she recognized him in 2022. Ethan shoots a stranger. Oh, I've already covered this. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so yeah, Abby. Oh yeah, okay, so here we are. Miranda, wearing Jim's bracelet, hides Victor and Eloise in the root cellar before going to help Jim, but Eloise follows. The boogeyman and the monsters trap Miranda and Eloise near the tree, perhaps due to an eclipse. Miranda is forced to make a Sophie's choice, choosing between saving Victor or Eloise, or perhaps it's the trolley problem, choosing between Victor and the rest of the town, perhaps triggering an eclipse. Might be both. She exchanges her own soul instead of choosing, and makes a deal for Victor's life, but he has to stay in Fromland for 40 years. Alternatively, Victor is chosen as an avatar for one of the 7 beings in Fromland, maybe the dragon archetype, and that's why he gets to live and can't remember. So I think there's 7 beings on the show, one of which is the boogeyman, the big bad, but I think there's 6 others. 4 of them are players, but there's 7 total, which is why the numbers 4 and 7 keep popping up on the show. Just for context there. So anyway, Eloise rips the bracelet from Miranda when holding hands, falling into the tree before escaping into the real world, perhaps through a window in the air. This ends the 1978 timeline. So that once that happens, we won't see 1978 again. So that set is done. Okay, so everyone who died gets to go home with their memories gone. So this is what happens. When you die, your soul gets stored in a tree, and that's why they're spreading as more and more people die. Sarah was not lying. When the game is over, everyone gets to go home. So when Victor says the trees moved 4 inches, I think it was, that's because people died. So the trees expanded outwards. The forest expanded outwards because more trees got added. So except in this case, Victor and Miranda's soul stay behind. Victor stays alive and Miranda becomes a ghost. Her soul becomes trapped in a tree. Maybe she's even the bottle tree itself and Victor's misremembering things. Maybe the bottle tree grew up after Miranda died and Victor dressed it with bottles. I don't know. But in any case, Miranda becomes a tree. The other voices are the souls of the other trees. So Victor says the faraway trees are temperamental because they are in fact real people controlling them, the souls of the dead. Perhaps even the children in white are a lot of the faraway trees. We'll see. I think important dead people become a faraway tree, basically. The trees spread as more and more people die. The boogeyman is the bad voice that tricked Sarah, though. Generally, I think if a vision isn't wearing white, they aren't a ghost tree. Jury is still out on Abby because she does wear a white hoodie, but she also seems to be helping the boogeyman in this case. So I don't know whether the boogeyman tricked her into saying the stuff that she says or... I do think that hope feeds the forest. I actually think the forest is good, but the roots underneath the forest that keep the boogeyman trapped are bad, maybe. Anyway, sorry. I also think we'll meet a lady in dirty white and a man in clean white, played by Michael Emerson. And that's the guy who plays Benjamin Linus in Lost. I believe I was the first person to notice that the man in white drawing in the opening credits of From looks like that actor. I posted about it on Reddit, and then a few weeks later, suddenly it's all over Facebook, and everyone, and I think it was me. But anyway, I think that will happen, and I think they're leaders of warring ghost factions. So I think if someone's clean, it means they're on the bad team side because they're sort of winning this situation. So they get to be clean, and the dirty ones are like living in the forest, like scrabbling for survival. So I think that's how perhaps it works here. Ethan's grandfather's soul returns to the real world, allowing him to sire Jim and solving the grandfather paradox. Abby's soul does too. So everyone who died, their memories are stolen, appearing as dreams instead. Like Eloise probably doesn't even remember her real name when she comes back to the real world. So eventually we will learn Abby has once been to Fromland, Baxter's grandma's been to Fromland. This is a cursed bloodline situation. And everyone who returned had their memories turned to dreams like Victor and Abby. So anyway, we will also learn that Eloise is Tabitha's mom. Now, I've been thinking recently that potentially what we're actually seeing here, and this came because I've been watching some videos about the connections between From and Lost. I want to give Dana Marie and I think Sophie L is the other one, a shout out for these ideas. I knew that From and Lost are connected in some way, in that there's many references. But what I found interesting was that Eloise was called... Eloise is called Eloise, and Eloise in the show Lost is the one who's all connected. She's the one who controls the time travel on the show, or at least understands the time travel on the show. So maybe Eloise time travels. So I thought that up until literally 2 or 3 days ago, and I really need to change this, but because I'm still 50-50 on this. I'm still 50-50, but I'm starting to lean, because of this Eloise connection, I'm starting to lean the other way. So it's possible that Eloise is Tabitha's mom and she had a teenage pregnancy. But it's also possible that Eloise time travels 15 years into the future when she returns to the real world. And Tabitha is, in fact, memory-free Eloise, who went forward in time by 15-ish years and was secretly adopted by a Colombian family. She wasn't told she's adopted. And a large chunk of what I'm about to tell you would need to be adjusted with this in mind. You know, I'm leaning in. Eloise is Tabitha, is time travel Tabitha, as opposed to Eloise being Tabitha's mom. But for the sake of this theory, you know, maybe I'll change some of this before I watch episode 1, because I'm starting to lean more towards Tabitha being Eloise. Let me think about it. But anyway, I've got this in here so people know that I think that potentially Eloise is Tabitha, which would make Victor Tabitha's brother. It would make Ethan Victor's nephew, and it would make Julie his niece. It would make Henry Tabitha's real dad. That would be cool, isn't it? That it's a reunion and they don't even know it's a reunion. And then they find out later and they're already friends and they already know each other. That would be interesting. But anyway, so let's say it's flashback to Eloise arriving in the real world with no memories or identity, taking a new name and going into foster care. She becomes a pregnant teenager. She has a new name and starts a new life in Colombia, giving birth to Tabitha. Now, alternatively, this is Tabitha herself. Jumping forward now with the family having moved to America. An adult Tabitha, pregnant with Julie, introduces her mom Eloise to Jim, worried her parents won't like him. But Eloise recognizes Jim, perhaps subconsciously, from their time in 1978 Fromland. Maybe her Colombian husband was once there too, if her husband is indeed Colombian. So, to Tabitha's surprise, they like him. Tabitha uses Jim's father's old bootlaces to make a bracelet, copying the design of her mother's, or she makes it from sort of half memory, from seeing the bracelet herself when she was a baby on her mom's wrist, because Miranda is actually Tabitha's mom. Again, I don't know which one it is. Is Eloise Tabitha's mom? Is Eloise Tabitha? It's very hard to tell at this stage. I'm thinking it could be both. You know, the fact, really the thing that keeps me thinking Eloise may be Tabitha's mom is the fact that Jim discusses how it was a surprise that Tabitha's parents liked him, as if they met him in Fromland somehow, which is what made me, but like don't remember it, but they sort of subconsciously like him. That is the only reason why I'm still on this. But if it's not Tabitha's mom, then it's got to be Tabitha herself. And that's why Eloise is called Eloise, because she time travels, just like Lost Eloise is like the time travel guru. So I don't know, if I had to if somebody said, you know, you've got to make a bet, I would say Tabitha is Eloise at this point, but we'll see. Okay, so giving birth to Julie, Tabitha and Jim travel in the death trap car to the hospital, almost crashing in the process. Jim's bracelet falls off in the commotion. In the car. At the hospital, they notice the bracelet missing and think they lost it there. Jim's dad is at the hospital, there to witness the birth of his first grandchild, Julie, and Jim gives the keys of a death trap car to his father, saying the car is too dangerous for children. Flash forward again, Jim's dad drives into Fromland at night and dies there when the broken brakes make him crash and he can't open the side door. I mean, it's massive Chekhov's gun. This car is the biggest Chekhov's gun in the whole show, in my opinion. The bracelet, still hidden in the car, is scavenged by Victor and stashed in the storage room. The car is moved to the junkyard. In the real world, it is assumed Jim's dad died in another way, likely a hurricane or a tornado, maybe Hurricane Michael, and his body was never recovered. It's also possible that he's Jade's father too, making Jim and Jade half brothers. You know, I know Real Enigmas sort of thought that they would like direct full brothers, and then I realized that there's two half brothers in the show, and we learn a lot about Jade's past that's kind of irrelevant. You know, about, you know, well, maybe it's not irrelevant, but it's, you know, I thought it was a clue. So anyway, I think they're half brothers, just like the Christopher Columbus's sons are half brothers, which I'll get onto later. But anyway, so his soul is also in Fromland somewhere in the current timeline. So is Thomas's. Wild guess, he was stolen as a baby, replaced with a changeling after the boogeyman called the Matthews home. Ethan will indeed need to rescue him, perhaps from an underground frozen lake or river. Wild guess surrounded by human guts. And the boogeyman needs the souls of 7 children to win each round, and Thomas is one of them. So I'll explain why 7 later, but that's why he wants Sarah to kill the boy, because he wants Ethan's soul, because he needs another child's soul. and this is related to the Minotaur and a ritual that happens in Vinland, Newfoundland, in the year sort of 1000, early 1000. So anyway, so at some point, Christie will bring a person in white back to life. There'll be a sword or knife duel. This is related to a mummer's play that I think it will happen in the origin story, but we'll come on to that later. So years later, Tabitha finds the storeroom bracelet, gives it back to Jim. So this completes the circle of a bootstrap paradox. The bootstrap paradox is if Tabitha copied the very same bracelet she is making, which version of the bracelet was first? The bracelet would never exist if there wasn't a copy. So yeah, who knows how this bracelet's going to work? I think it's probably going to be a lot more complicated and convoluted than I'm picturing. It's clearly a huge sort of part of explaining the show. I can't suss it. This is probably going to be the most incorrect part of my whole theory, because this isn't actually really related to clues, and it's more like trying to predict the plot. But you know, I've talked about it as much as I can. Maybe some of what I said makes sense and will turn out to be partly true, or you know, slightly true. Anyway, so another prediction. I think this will probably happen in season 4 or later. Someone likely Boyd will travel deep into the earth and or through a mirror and or over a rainbow bridge and or using his torch. He's been there before when he visited Martin's prison, which is not an older version of the ruins Boyd saw, but simply a mirror version where it hasn't been destroyed. So I believe in the Canadian world, he will encounter a Canadian Mountie end up in a Canadian amusement park town, complete with a Ferris wheel, a merry-go-round, and perhaps even a teacup ride and mini golf. There will be elephant iconography and 4 kings, and perhaps a rat infestation. They may even film at the old Trinity Loop amusement park, potentially. I think that would be really cool. You know, there's a few clues that make me think that might happen. It's like this old abandoned amusement park in Newfoundland. Or maybe that's how John Griffin pictured it being filmed, but maybe it doesn't make sense to do it there. But in any case, it's possible the monsters in the Canadian Fromtown turn into crows during the day and invade US Fromtown. And the monsters in the US town turn into rats during the day and invade the Canadian Fromtown. So the monsters in this Canadian town would be stereotypical Canadian TV characters and stereotypes, including one wearing a hockey mask to later inspire Jason Voorhees. That'll make sense later. A lumberjack, a farmer, a miner, a fisherman, maybe even a plaid-shirted fiddler, because around the 1950s and 60s, there was this like super like on the TV all the time, like violinist who wore this like these plaid shirts, kind of like Victor wears. So yeah, we'll see. Later, we will learn that the American side is a mirror world, and eventually that is why Da Vinci wrote using mirrored writing. And there's a wild guess I'm going to throw out here. We may even see a third version of Fromland somehow, depicting Mexican Fromland, because Mexico is also part of North America. And I think they want to be able to say, we're telling the story of North America. So yeah. And these locations are where some of the other beings have been hanging out for the first 2 seasons. So I think, you know, in the first 2 seasons, we mostly see the colors associated with the main players. And now we're going to start to see more green, more purple, more orange, potentially. Anyway, we'll see. All right. So who are these 7 mythological beings that I've referenced a few times as I've been speaking? Well, we will see hints of these monsters in season 3. Bonhomme Setters, who's a like Canadian boogeyman / Sandman. Cressy, the Loch Ness monster like dragon. So Newfoundland has like a Loch Ness monster type dragon creature called Cressy. And I think that we're actually going to see that on the show. So it'll be more like a water dragon than like a proper sort of fantasy dragon, I think, you know, with the humps that come out the water sort of thing. The Alsatian dog, I think we'll eventually find out that he's a werewolf called Loup Garou. And I think we'll meet Bigfoot as one of the good team, the hag as sort of like maybe a neutral party, or maybe trying to help, a giant spider and a giant squid. So those are the 7 beings on the show. I think we'll also learn that the boogeyman can walk around invisible due to an object he possesses, maybe a cap or a cloak of some kind of like Harry Potter's invisibility cloak. And this is who Marielle saw in her room. It's who banged on the floor. It's who threw the rope, who sits on the desk and single chair outside the Matthews house to watch the kids who live there. And I think he's able to shapeshift to look like the dead, much like Lost's Man in Black. And in fact, I think all the dead characters and creepy ghosts seen by Jade, except for the children in Right, Sorry. I have terrible allergies when I visit my father's house. I'm doing my video from here because I want to get this out before I've watched any of season 3. So anyway, what else? It's able to shapeshift to look like the dead, like Man I'm Back. And so I think all the dead characters and creepy ghosts seen by Jade, except for the children in white, are the boogeyman shape-shifting to look like previous like people who have been to Fromland. I don't know why Boyd sees Ellis though. If it's correct that he can only make himself look like people who have died, which is why he picks Abby, Katri, and Tom, all 3 who have died already. Why is he able to shapeshift to look like Ellis? So the only explanation for this would be if Ellis goes back in time to the past, died there in the past, which gives the boogeyman the template to now use in the present day. Tinfoil, I know, sorry. But this show is crazy. What can I do but just try and make some like a logical leap here to try and explain it? Every single time, I know people think this theory is super complicated. I always try and go for the simplest answer that answers the mystery fully and completely. Anyway, we'll see. So the 4 humors. So I think we may see the monsters vomiting yellow bile into a chalice or vessel of some kind. I say this because on the poster for season 3, if you zoom right in, you can see what looks like a monster with like yellow stuff coming out of its mouth. So I think yellow bile is the liquid fear that's collected by the player who's Luke Guru. And we may see that blood is also being collected in the form of pain by the rats for the boogeyman. Maybe we have black bile, courage from the that's being collected by the crows for Bigfoot or something. Maybe there's phlegm being collected. That's the other 4th humor for hope or love or joy. And perhaps spiders are the ones with the phlegm. Yeah. These liquids they're probably also an important magical resource or form of point scoring, maybe for the 4 players and 3 other beings in this game. I've only got liquids for the first 4. Maybe I should look into 3 other liquids, like human liquids that maybe connect. Like maybe there's someone who wrote the 7 humors. Maybe that the other 3 might be that. So we'll see. So I'll be very interested when people vomit to see what color of things they vomit up. Like I've seen, I noticed that Toby vomits yellow in season 1. So, which is bile, obviously. So, okay. Yeah. Anyway, so I think that on this show, emotions power these beings and they collect them in liquids. And the colors associated with these emotions are, I've assigned them to each player. Now, these are probably wrong. I'm pretty certain about black for the boogeyman. I'm pretty certain about red for the witch, yellow for the guardian, and fear for the beast. But the rest of them, I really don't know. I think, to be honest, that the showrunners thought that this show would be unsolvable until season 3, so they haven't given us the context we need to answer these questions yet. And we will hear it in season 3. We will see some sort of connection, but I'm going to do my best here. But I'm acknowledging that some of these may be wrong. So I think orange is sadness. I think when people wear orange, they're sad about something. I think purple is love or hate. I genuinely can't decide which. Julie has a purple sweater. It's one of the only times we see purple with one of the main characters on the show, but we also see background characters wearing it, so it suggests it's one of the colors. So there's a 50-50 chance there that the color isn't purple at all and instead gray, which we see people wearing far more often. And there's a still from season 3 where Boyd is wearing a sort of gray, I don't know what you would call it, a gray jumper, sweater, I guess, underneath his jacket. So it may be that the color is gray. I just thought, we've got all these references to rainbows on the show. Would they really pick gray over purple? I don't know. But anyway, and why make the sweater purple? Why not make it a neutral color? So I just felt like they were, and obviously the clothing people wears on this show seems to be important. So that's why I put that together. Maybe the purple is so rare because the sea monster archetype, that maybe the 7th being isn't actually in Fromland. Maybe he is out in the real world and he's helping collect people to bring Fromland. So that's why we're not seeing that much purple, because he's not actually there. I don't know. We'll see. All right. So what's next? Yeah, I've discussed purple. I said black is pain. Red is pink. Red and pink are hope, joy, maybe love as well. I don't know. I think maybe hate is purple. It makes sense that the boogeyman's like son, effectively, Kanan, who like serves him and who's like a tentacle monster now, You know, it makes sense that he would be hate, really, but I can't be sure, because why would Tabitha be giving something that represents hate to Julie, unless it's when Julie touches it, she feels hate, and then she reacts badly to Tabitha as a consequence. I don't know. So, you know, like I said, I don't think we've been given that context yet. Okay, so I think people start wearing more green on the show, more orange, more purple. Boyd and Ellis in particular, I think we'll see them wearing green for the, or at least Boyd wearing green for the first time. I think Ellis maybe wore green once. Folks wear the clothing representing the main emotion they are feeling over the course of when they're wearing it. And often the moment the clothing is introduced, but it's super imprecise. Like, you know, Julie, for example, she wears green very briefly in season 1, and the scene where she wears green is where she comes out of the house and gets angry at Ethan for talking to Victor. So I felt like, okay, that's anger. But, you know, she's also very sad because her parents are divorcing and her brother died. She's also very feeling a lot of pain as a consequence. So, you know, they made it super vague, but I feel like it's emotion. The colors are connected to emotions, which are connected to each of these 7 beings, players, if you will. Although I think there's 4 main players, which I've done here in this red box. These are the ones who I think are players. These guys, I don't know what they're doing. Maybe they're playing a different game somewhere else. I have no idea. But there's 7 players. All right. Some more guesses, just briefly. I think we'll also see animals native to Newfoundland, including an actual polar bear, killer whale, or reindeer. If they put a polar bear on the show, I think it would be amazing. Absolutely amazing, because I think one of the 7 beings can shapeshift to look like a polar bear. It's related to Inuit mythology as well. There's some like Inuit mythology in this show. And I think a lot of people will be like, oh my God, this is definitely a spin-off for Lost. And that's going to be super fun. What I actually think is going to happen is that one of the people involved in the creation of Lost is going to be one of the writers and musicians and creators in the world of Fromland across history who have received an object, like a cursed object, and then it inspires them to create stuff that's similar to Fromland. So anyway, we'll cover that later. So I think, yeah, we'll see those animals. Polar bear is the most likely, really. Killer whale, reindeer, I could take or leave. I think it's the polar bear. I suspect we'll see a fuse lit and an explosion. Someone may be injured by a blast of wind. Their wound will swell up before erupting with sticks and feathers. They may also learn the answers to the riddle that's in at the end of season 3 with the music box. They touch, they break, they steal. Touched my heart, stole my heart, broke my heart. People reference hearts all the time on the show. The answer is heart. And another wild guess, at some point, a male may attempt to rescue a young female from an underground river/lake found via the caves after they're kidnapped by the monsters. And yeah, so time travel to the US is next. Just going to go grab some water. I'll be back. Sorry, my allergies are really playing up. So unfortunately, I'm going to sound very plugged up this entire time because I'm not used to the countryside. And I live in London. All right, so next section, talking about the time travel on the show. Let's have a look. Did I? Oh, I need to. Oh my God, have I been sharing the wrong page the entire time? No, that sucks. Or did it? Share this instead. No, I've been looking at the wrong section. All right, well, just for posterity, everyone, if you want to, I'm just going to scroll through this entire section. I'm sorry, guys. That's me not being used to YouTube. So I'm just going to scroll through this so everyone can see. And if you're watching this back, apologies. I can't go back and edit it. It is what it is. Sorry. You know, this is just a record of my theory anyway. It's not my main theory videos that I'm going to be posting about. Although I am kind of sad that I just made that mistake because I just talked for a really long time with people having the wrong thing to look at. Oh, well, that'll teach me for not looking at my YouTube comments while on here. All right. Okay. So let's see. Now I've done this. So, oh yeah, here was the map I was referencing. God, I'm so annoyed at myself, but I'm not starting again. I've put too much time into this already. Okay, so now we're going to go to part 3. Share this tab instead. Okay, good. All right, so time travel in Fromland. So again, spoiler warning potentially. A great many of the clues relate to historical figures from North American history and the end of the War of the Roses, interestingly enough, in England, falling roughly on the dates on Tabitha's dream sequence. So some historical figures are given more clues than others, suggesting they might later become characters on the show. So Caroline dies, like hoodoo magic. Alma Hayes, the strong woman. Like, look, the goat's called Alma. They've got clues to the OK Corral. We've got clues to the Birdcage Theatre. Alma Hayes was the strong woman who acted in the Birdcage Theatre. The number of times people reference being strong is crazy. And I think everyone's seen the trailer. Everyone knows that he's like, you're so strong, you're so strong. People being strong enough and being strong is constantly referenced throughout the show. If I looked up the word strong right now, how many times is strong used on From? It's used 14 times. 14 times. Talking about people being strong. Okay, so let's keep going. There are 6 key threads here. So there's 6 timelines in Fromland itself, and then the rest of the timelines are before Fromland was created. So the 6 key threads, and I don't think they're going to explore every timeline on the lighthouse. The main ones I've been able to identify are the obviously the 1970s we've already covered. We also have the 1930s, 1880s, 1860s, 1770s, and 1670s. And all of this takes place in Fromland. There's also an origin story from 1498 that I should reference here, the John Cabot one in the real world. And there's also prequels to this, again in the real world, with the Templar expedition by Henry Sinclair to Canada, this legend of that. And then also the Vinland from the Vikings, the year 1000, Freydis Eriksson's expedition, actually. And then there's a whole another looser set of mythological, biblical, and ancient historical characters that go even further back, where Newfoundland is no longer Newfoundland. It's rather like a mystical island from a different mythology. So yeah, 1498 is by far the most prevalent and perhaps the easiest to start with. So this is the main origin story, right? This is the main story that Ethan is telling us to put together. And we're going to get to that later. It really is the whole, like the vast majority of the shows point to the 1498 timeline, which is why I'm absolutely certain that this section is true. And yeah, so I don't know if I read this already, but yeah, they're mostly from England, and to a lesser extent Italy, Scotland, Germany, Portugal, Spain, France, Burgundy, China, Iran, India, Iceland, Greenland, Newfoundland. I mean, it's also the best one to solve first, because when you solve a historical figure in the 1498 origin story, these are the archetypes that the historical figures in the other timelines in Fromland mimic from United States history, or at least North American history. So these are primarily soldiers, sheriffs / lawmen, rebels / outlaws, criminals / prisoners, shamans / witches, clowns, dancers, singers, drummers, actors, musicians, poets, writers, explorers, captains, inventors, rulers / royals, the super wealthy, like Jade, and priests. So those are the archetypes that you will see coming up regularly throughout the show. Okay, let's see what else. Sorry, my nose is so itchy. I'm going to have to rub it this whole time. Okay, so let's see. Where were we? Yeah, so each new historical figure discovered is a great puzzle piece. So if you find Emmett Kelly, the hobo clown, in the 1930s timeline, you can search for other clowns in the other timelines and find out Yvette Matthews, who was a clown in the 1880s, so I think is an ancestor of Jim's, George Fox in the 1860s timeline, and Triboulet, the court jester, in the 1498 origin story. But another example, I'm absolutely certain one of these people is Richard Amarike. He's the sheriff of Bristol. There's a lawman / sheriff in every timeline. Boyd is the sheriff now. Elliot Ness, don't touch me, don't touch me. He was the leader of the Untouchables in the 1930s. I mean, come on. Morgan Earp in the 1880s, Bass Reeve in the 1860s, Charles Lynch in the 1770s. So for those of you thinking this may be overly complex, or the showrunners would never put this much thought into it, all I can say is this. I mean, I have, and it's not even my own show. But also, John Griffin has been working on this show since 9/11. 23 years he was working on it. It's the first ever show he got made after a lifetime of screenwriting. He even won the Nichols Fellowship, which is a very prestigious, very hard to win scholarship and award to study screenwriting. And Jack Bender has even said that Griffin is an amazing example of why you should never give up on your dreams. This guy has been trying into his 40s, never got anything made, and then suddenly he gets this amazing film called Crater made, and he makes From at the same time. Just an amazing turnaround, and it just shows the power of perseverance. But in any case, this guy, this is his magnum opus. He may never make another TV show again. This is his everything. This is his life. I can't imagine how stressful it must be to be John Griffin right now. He is probably spinning about 1 million plates, and I frankly, I can't imagine I'm a very the plate that is me, if I am right about any of this, is a fun plate for him. So big respect for John Griffin. Big respect for the research that he's done. The respect he seems to have for Native American mythology in particular, from what my research has uncovered, at least what I think. It just seems like he has a huge respect for history. He wants pretty much everything in this to be potentially historically accurate. As in, like, this could have happened. If like when you read the history books, you're like, technically we don't know what they were doing from this time to that time. Or technically, all we know is that they have a grave, but we don't know if they died. That sort of thing. Like, everything he's done seems to be logically consistent and could work if you just, follow the story. So anyway, and the other thing is Griffin and Pinkner, they had an interview at Comic-Con. I was very sad at how little footage from all the interviews they did at Comic-Con escaped. I really, really like watching interviews with the creators, and they never seem to do them. Jack Bender in particular, he's only done 2. I would love to see more. But yeah, so they said that they have walls and walls of notes to keep the whole story straight, and even imaginary walls, whatever that means. Okay, here we go. Predictions. More time travel will occur in the series. So Jim and Kenny find a forest and a hoodoo Nkondi doll on the edge of a wood and stone village, once protecting it from their own monsters. We will see this village in the 1860s version of Fromland. I mean, do you really think they built all of that just to leave it empty, and have just Jim and Kenny go there for a quick camping trip? Surely we'll see it populated in some way at some point. Whether it's a flashback or time travel, as I believe. I just think, why build this old rundown town if you're not going to show how it once was? I don't know. I just think it's coming. And below are the historical figures that I believe the showrunners have left clues for, and who I suspect we will see as mainly extras, but with a handful of main cast too. Now, I'm not going to bore you all, but by going through every single one of these, I've got a lot of lists that I'm not going to read through one by one as I go through this, but they are here as a reference for anyone who wants to look them up. And if I'm correct about them, then I can simply refer back to them on this video and in the Reddit posts. So yeah, okay, so here we go. Okay, Ito. She's the kimono wraith. Japanese teenager, would have disappeared in 1869. Caroline Dye, hoodoo, very famous hoodoo root doctor from that time period. Crazy Horse is a Heyoka clown. He's going to be a sort of religious, shamanistic figure from I can't remember what part of Native American culture Crazy Horse comes from. Sorry, please forgive me. I'm British. I didn't grow up in this in that world, but I believe that Heyoka clowns are an absolutely fascinating part of that culture that he comes from, where they bend things to make they take bent things and make them straight. They take straight things and make them bent. They wear hot clothes when it's hot. They wear they wear clothes. They wear coats when it's hot, and they go naked when it's cold. They do things in opposites. For really interesting and traditional and very unique and amazing reasons. So I think we'll see Crazy Horse doing that. Solomon Northup, I think, as a fiddler, he'll be there as a fiddler, and he'll have been there the longest. I actually think because Solomon Northup in reality did disappear in 1864 or 1863, and no one knows what happened to him, we can believe that Solomon may be a candidate for remaining in Fromland and becoming a tree. Maybe he's the bottle tree. I don't know. I'm curious who the bottle tree is. We'll find out. George Fox is a clown. So maybe there's 2 clowns, a Heyoka clown, or maybe he's in. No, he would, based on these dates, he would have to be here. What else? I mean, Crazy Horse. Sorry, no, forget that. So anyway, so we'll skim through this. I also think we're going to see people from the Fort Pillow massacre. Here, this guy Nathan Bedford Forrest, I think. And I also think we're going to see the Civil War soldier, maybe this guy called Ellis Falls or someone called Lionel Booth. So anyway, yeah, you can see all the people here. So most of the later seasons will be set in a historic version of Fromtown. In the 1860s, Edison may turn a box he finds into a music box. This box was originally Pandora's box, I believe, which is why Hope is referenced just before Boyd destroys it. Caroline, she's a hoodoo root doctor. I think she curses the boogeyman with Nkondi dolls. I think she actually used them protectively, but yeah, spitting, goofer dust, van oil, foot trap magic, newspaper on the walls, infestation of roots, worms and cicadas inside him, ritualistic song, Heyoka clown and dance-based contributions from Crazy Horse and Okaito. The boogeyman keeps this curse. So when he possesses someone like Martin, they suffer the same symptoms as him. It's also because, so later I'll get onto this, the boogeyman is technically Cain from the Bible, the biblical Cain, and his curse comes into play here. So he was cursed where whatever harms him would be returned sevenfold to whoever did it to him. So I think when something harms him, he picks up the powers of things that harm him, which is maybe why there's roots, rats, cicadas, and worms on the show. I think that he's being trapped by the roots, which is why he has root powers. I think maybe there's some sort of history with rats. I don't know. But the cicadas and the worms, I think, are related to this curse that Caroline Dye does to the boogeyman, making him have worms inside him and cicadas inside him. What a common hoodoo curse would be to put living animals inside you. And foot track magic is like when you step on a curse, they hide something underneath, and then the curse like springs up on us like a landmine. Okay, so they still lose, and perhaps a trapped soul Solomon becomes a bottle tree, or Caroline hangs the bottles before returning home. Every faraway tree is someone dead whose soul didn't get to leave Fromland, maybe even Miranda. Miranda, Victor's mom, has also time traveled to the 1860s and befriends Jim. Jim and Kenny subsequently time travel again with Miranda back to Fromland in 1978. This is the last we would see of the 1860s timeline. That's all the things I think might happen there. We will also time travel to the 1880s. This is almost a certainty, in my opinion. This timeline will be filled with circus acts, freak show acts. Obviously, that's not a politically correct term. I'm just using it in a historical context. That is what they were called. They also became known as wonders, which I thought is a less offensive term, but still not used. But there will be disabled actors or people with who look different, unique features. Will show up as real historical figures. Rodeo performers, outlaws, and cowboys will also appear. There's constantly references to people roping stuff into stuff. And if we do see this in season 4, it's going to be P.T. Barnum's circus train. I think that's what the rail tracks are telling us. And one of the buildings in this version of From Town will be the Birdcage Theatre from Tombstone. We'll actually see a painting of a dancing like Persian girl called the Dancing Fatima in the entrance. You'll see cages hanging from the ceiling where like sex workers known as soiled doves used to work. And there was also a never-ending poker game in the basement featuring Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday and a bunch of other billionaires. A billionaire and some other people. And many of these below historical figures will feature. I think Alma Hayes and maybe Anna Swan, the giant, are going to be important characters. A female giant from Millbrook, Nova Scotia. And isn't it interesting that Martin's from Millbrook? Anyway, there'll also be a 1930s timeline of Prohibition era mafia, detectives, actors, starlets, singers, dancers, and comedians. It's likely the kids, the ghosts of the dead children from this timeline, are from the school bus. They did have yellow school buses in the 1930s, and we see that on Victor's drawings. These are the souls of the 7 children that the boogeyman used to win the game in that timeline. So those 7 kids, those children in white, they were sacrificed to the boogeyman in some way, or he took their souls. So yeah, we'll see. The children are saying Angakui, which is the Inuit word for shamans or witches. So perhaps it's because an Inuit woman's ghost has looked after them all these years, or they disappeared in an Inuit town and they befriended Inuit people. I don't know. But anyway, I think all of these people, Frank Sinatra, Emmett Kelly, Buster Keaton, Louis Long, Adele Astaire, Fred Astaire, Lucky Luciano, all of these people, I think, potentially could appear in a time travel portion of the show. I also think we'll see a 1770s timeline of Revolutionary War characters, including founding fathers and redcoats. We're going to see the guys who did the massacre that set off the War of Independence. We're going to see literally like half the founding fathers, maybe all of them. I don't know. All sorts of people. Then we're also going to see a 1670s timeline of New England accused witches, but before Salem, so that many of the people involved in the Salem witch trials are going to be in Fromland, and then they'll be returned to the real world, and then the Salem witch trials will happen to them. There'll also be some pirates. Now, this one, I got really bored on a vacation in India, and I maybe went a little too deep on this one. So while the main ones on here, I think I will be correct on, some of these are highly speculative. You can see there's too many on here. But anyway, we'll see. They may briefly stop around other dates on the wall, covering other times and historical figures. This is kind of tinfoil, so I'm not going to read it out loud, but it's here for posterity. If you made it this far, thanks for reading. Okay, so next section. Tab instead. Great. All right, so what's going to happen next? So I think in the real world, Tabitha or other friendly people are going to escape. I think people are going to escape at the end of season 3, and they're going to start some crazy quest. If Tabitha's not doing it for most of season 3 as well, who knows? Who knows? I think it would be Tabitha would be the most appropriate to do this, but I don't know. So traveling to Europe, they'll investigate clues left for them in paintings, poems, riddles, carvings, statues, castles, libraries, creators' homes, and more, perhaps left there by a secretive Rosicrucian society, if not Da Vinci himself. So this will make sense later, but for now, all you need to know is that in the origin story that created Fromland, many artifacts feature and they sort of evolve across time. You know, they turn into different things. And these objects, they find their way back to Europe after the events of the origin story and into the hands of Leonardo da Vinci, who sets up the secret Rosicrucian order to safeguard these like magical, mystical, cursed objects. Centuries later, this order eventually resulted into like 2 competing modern orders who will be hunting Tabitha and Fromley. And they'll be involved in some way, I think. Maybe they're not hunting them, but they're certainly involved. And these objects have ended up scattered, mostly with celebrities, it seems. So these objects, they're passed across time. And I've said this earlier, that it's mostly royals, writers, philosophers, artists, musicians, psychologists, entertainers, actors, and inventors. And it ends up with these modern day celebrities, which I'll get into in a bit. So these are some of the places that I think she may explore. Maybe this is tinfoil, I don't know. I actually flew to Paris and visited pretty much all of these places just to see if I could find clues there. It was not a particularly successful trip. But you know, it was fun to go. And you know, I went to Da Vinci's house, all sorts of things. But if I'm right, Tabitha, or whoever, maybe you know, all the main characters may end up in France trying to solve some sort of mystery. Anyway, there's also a bunch of paintings, specifically Da Vinci's paintings. The Salvator Mundi is a very important one. The Last Supper is quite an important one for this show. The Girl with a Pearl Earring, I think, is quite important. And the Adoration of the Magi, potentially, are quite important on the show. I think they're going to be part of these clues, part of the solution. Maybe we'll just see them in the background. I don't know. But I think we'll see something related to them. So anyway, so they're going to be following these clues and solving riddles. And what they're going to do is they're basically going to trace the path of these various artifacts from the origin story. And I suspect the main ones that the main quest that they go on will feature Shakespeare, Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland, H.P. Lovecraft. This is why Ariel and I are going to Providence to film a mini documentary related to H.P. Lovecraft, as it might connect to From while we're out there. And we're going to do a meetup with Tony Teflon, maybe Jeremy Ice and Fire, maybe Julie, and whoever else wants to join, they're welcome to. And Carl Jung will also form a part of this, I believe, and Victor Hugo is a huge part of this. In fact, I even bought a gift for John Griffin. If I ever meet him, I bought him a first illustrated edition of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, just in case he ever comes to like a Comic-Con in London. It will be a gift to him, because this is how certain I think that Victor Hugo is a big part of the origin story here. It's all to do with Esmeralda, Triboulet, Philippe de Comines, a French actor whose name escapes me, and the Feast of Fools, and a priest who's in love with a dancing girl, and a witch trial. Like, it's all connected, believe it or not. Anyway, we'll see. And the emerald is Esmeralda, the emerald, and the goat, Djali, as well. Also super important. Isn't it interesting? We're seeing goats being referenced more and more in season 3. There's like a goat in a tree. And you know, my theory connects to Esmeralda's goat. Maybe it's a crazy coincidence. Maybe it's not. We'll see. But it's not the reason why I made that connection. So anyway, this is going to sound, you know, Charlie Kelly from Always Sunny in Philadelphia with his crazy like murder board. You know, this is what I believe solving the show looks like. I have not you know, I work 3 jobs. I don't have the time to solve all of these clue chains, but what you do is you find someone being referenced on the show. Like, for example, Jade mentions his Giacometti, right? He mentions his Giacometti that he owns. And where is this? Where is Giacometti on here? Here somewhere. Here we go. Alberto Giacometti. So you'll find some character reference. You know, we've got Oscar Wilde's poems. We've got various scientists reference. You know, all sorts of stuff. All sorts of. There's a lot of Shakespeare references on the show. You know, what you do is you find a reference to an individual. You find keywords, keyword clues on the show throughout the names of their books, their works of art, like key things about their lives, and then you try and see if they received an object. Who did they receive the object from? In this case, Andrea Salmon, friends with Alberto Giacometti, gave him it. And then who did Giacometti give it to? Who came after Giacometti? Jean-Paul Sartre. And then you trace it using this method. You look, you see who was he friends with? Who could he have given an object to? Then you go through all the options. You find the one who has the most connections to the show from, and you trace these paths. And I ended up all down to Tim Burton, maybe Neil Gaiman. I don't know. He's been in the news lately for certain things. That might mean that it's going to be Tim Burton. I think Neil Gaiman with the book American Gods. It's so similar to what I think the show is doing that you know, he writes so many things that are connected from that. I think Neil Gaiman is the plan, or was the plan. But if it's not, then it's Tim Burton. So we'll see where these things go. But that's just, and anyway, so these are some miscellaneous ones. Actually, Walt Disney belongs somewhere in here. I just didn't write him down because there was a much closer connection, but it probably went to Walt Disney in between them. These are some of the other ones I found. Again, Liza Minnelli and Lucille Ball, they actually belong in one of these sections here, I think. But I didn't want to have these lists too long. So sometimes you can just skip them because they're all mutual friends. So I've skipped Liza Minnelli and Lucille Ball, but they're there. And I think Lucille Ball, I should have included her in this list here, because she's part of one of the TV series that the like 1960s sitcoms that the monsters are imitating. Now I know that Frere Jacques, if you trace Frere Jacques, we will arrive at a new celebrity. And Jacques Ballieu. I'm friends with Real Enigmas and Theories. I jump on a lot of his lives. We're doing some documentaries together about From. And I've left these for him to solve. He has not done so far. Real, ticking clock, come on. But I would really like Real to get to the bottom of this. So if you want to use this method and come back to me with a celebrity that you think this whatever object it is arrives on that with them, maybe a bell potentially, I don't know. Nothing stopping me from going back and tracing far more of these paths. Maybe I'm absolutely nuts. Maybe this would be, if this is wrong, then the pareidolia that I've been experiencing is extreme, and I should like take a step back from the show. But what I think will happen is Stephen King will be the first sort of end of a clue chain that they encounter, and I think Stephen King will give Tabitha a red diary, which will contain the story of Fromland, like written in its margins. And by the way, it's super time consuming to solve these things. So that's another reason. You know, I have 3 jobs. I don't have time to solve it completely. I feel like this is enough of a solve for people to say he solved it. He knew what he was doing, even if I didn't get everyone. So there we go. I also thought it was a fun coincidence that Lloyd Alexander, he's part of one of these clue chains, and his most famous character is from the Black Cauldron. So cauldron is another clue on From. We've seen drawings of cauldrons, people carrying like large pots that look like cauldrons. And anyway, this character from the Black Cauldron, Taran, shared my name. So I thought that was pretty fun coincidence. There's a lot of synchronicities actually that my life have with From. Like Bridget. Oh, should I cover it now? Okay, so there's this character called Bridget of York, who's the main character of the origin story. As the history on her is extremely sparse. She was an English princess, and you know, on her Wikipedia page, in the footnotes, you can see that she's basically only ever been to 3 places her entire life: Westminster Abbey, and Dartford Priory, I think it's called. So she's been to an abbey and a nunnery and then maybe like a palace or two in between. But there's only one place that she's been to historically that we know she's been to, other than those small number of like 2 or 3 places. And one of those places is called the King's Wardrobe, and that's actually a building that I and my family own and steward and look after. So I thought it was really cool that I own the building where one of the historical figures on the show, who's like the main character, like once walked and once set foot in. And it's one of like 3 places they ever were. So you know, that kind of synchronicity I think is really cool. And also I wrote a story called the Contender series, which, you know, has a lot of similarities to From. Like, there's a big mystery. You know, people teleported to this other place. They don't know how they got there. They don't know why they're there. There's some sort of game being played. They don't know who the beings are. It's like a big evil. They don't know who they are. It's very similar to From. So actually, you know, in a funny way, I could potentially become part of the canon of From, where I get given an object and became one of the last people to receive an object, because I'm also a professional author. Who's achieved some small level of success. Nothing compared to, you know, Terry Pratchett, Neil Gaiman, all that sort of stuff. But you know, I know that sounds super arrogant and stupid, but it's just a little fun thing that came to me. So yeah, okay. So here we go. So in the lore of From, these cursed or holy objects, they influence these people who receive them with visions or dreams. It makes them really successful in their craft. But it also aligns their work thematically with the origin story and world of Fromland. So as many of you know, I think there's like a metaphorical card game being played here. And a board games being played here, much like Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, has people traveling for a mirror down a rabbit hole, you know, going to this world where there's board games and checkered floors everywhere, and there's the Queen of Hearts and the King of Clubs, and there's chess pieces and things. You know, that is all Fromland. You know, that's in the, it's so interesting. In the lore of the show, Alice in Wonderland was inspired by From, when in reality, From was inspired by Alice in Wonderland. But it's so meta. It's kind of interesting. Look, if I'm right, it would be super cool and meta. We'll see. We'll see if I'm right. I'm pretty sure, you know, if all of these connections I've made are not shown on the screen and we don't learn these things directly, and it's just like, here's some pictures of Alice in Wonderland in the background, I will be super disappointed. But I don't think this will happen. The reason why is because John Griffin has said multiple times, I see this like making of this show as me having a contract with my audience, that all of the clues and all the things that I'm putting forward are going to be answered and revealed correctly. So if I think if he created this massive, diverse amount of references and inspirations and stuff, and then it doesn't, all these things that I believe are clues, and then they just sort of these very vague, esoteric like references that you sort of see in the background, like Easter eggs, I'd be hugely disappointed. But if you take all of these clues as direct, answerable, see on screen answers to all these references, this is what I believe will happen. And I think that one of these people who owns the artifacts will be involved in the creation of Lost. And I think that person might be J.J. Abrams. I don't think we'll meet J.J. Abrams, but we may see like a something like this list here. You'll see J.J. Abrams in there, and that would be really cool. That's just something I think will happen. I don't know. It's a very tinfoil again. So what are these objects? Well, there's this one, Emerald's Elizabeth's emerald hexagonal pendant. It had hair. It has hair embedded in it somehow, which I think they may actually use that. And it's the Cathar Graal Stone, aka Esmeralda's Emerald, aka the Emerald Tablet, aka the Philosopher's Stone. You know, they have this. This Emerald Stone is used as an item in practically every single mythology on the show. It starts off as an emerald in the devil's forehead. It becomes the Emerald Tablet. It becomes the Graal Stone from Cathar mythology. It becomes the Philosopher's Stone from Rosicrucian mythology. Anyway, look. So I believe this pendant belonging to Elizabeth I will be the emerald that they need to collect in the real world. I also think this signet ring that once belonged to Erasmus will also be a ring that they need to collect. I think Lord Byron's skull cup will come up. Napoleon's wounded eagle standard, I think, will also be an object they need to collect. This one I'm certain on. Elizabeth Taylor's La Peregrina earring, I'm pretty certain will also be there. Queen Victoria's wedding dress potentially may also be an object they need to collect. The blunt Stradivarius, this one I would give a 90% level of accuracy. I'm pretty sure this will come up. It will actually be Odysseus's bowstring, potentially, that specifically that they need to collect rather than the violin itself. But, you know, they have the song that has something blunt in it, and Jack Bender references Boyd as an old Stradivarius in an interview that he does. And it's actually quite fun watching John Griffin's poker face when Jack Bender says that, because I think it was a big clue. And then all of these objects belonging to John Dee, the occult magician, I think all of these will need to be collected in some way. I think this one's a bit more speculative. Juan Borgia uses a sword in the origin story, in my opinion, to fight. And it's interesting that Cesare Borgia also has a famous sword that's in a museum. So it may actually be that this sword is actually in the Chalice Well in England somewhere instead, and this is just a coincidence. But I thought I'd include it just in case. And also quite certain about this lost Fabergé egg. And in general, these objects are likely to be some of these. Okay, so a shoe, a belt, a bag, a staff. There's probably like another 3 of these that I'm missing. Who knows? There's a lot of items to collect already. I don't know how they're going to do it. Why reference all these things if you're not going to use them? I don't know. But anyway, that's what I think's happening. So many of these objects are used in multiple mythologies and historical time periods that cover the origin story of from, evolving from one version of itself to the next. So, for example, Odysseus's bowstring will become a violin string on the blunt Stradivarius. Leif Erikson's stone that he used to find Newfoundland. There's a legend that Leif Erikson, he had like a special crystal that like he would use to almost like a compass to figure out which direction he was going, which helped him get to Newfoundland. I actually think in the Salvator Mundi, Da Vinci's Salvator Mundi, you see Jesus holding like a ball with these like 3 little dots in it. I think that is actually Leif Erikson's sunstone that's been like smoothed out, and then eventually it becomes John Dee's crystal ball. So you'll see these things evolving in different mythologies. They end up being in the modern world, possibly in the possession of a celebrity. So Pegasus' skull will eventually become a kneading pole and a hobby horse used in a mummer's play before an apotropaic cunning folk protective spell in 1502, maybe 1503, we don't know. Queen Victoria's white wedding dress is made from the same material that Bridget of York wears in the origin story, more on that later. Oh man, it's so hard to like put this into a narrative that makes sense. This is really why this story couldn't have been told any other way other than being shown on a TV screen. I don't think this would make a very good book. I think it's just too many things to hold in your head at once. You really need to see a simpler version of this play on screen. But I think this is like almost like the research and the like base that they're working off. And then we're not going to see all these historical figures necessarily. Maybe there'll be extras in the background. Maybe we won't see all of these objects, but maybe they'll be like there on the table when they're showing them the objects, but they don't reference it. They don't tell you what it is, but the theorists who made the solve will recognize it, and they'll be able to point to it. Maybe. So just to give you an idea of how these things evolve. So these are the different timelines that created from that. So it goes from Eden to Mount Ararat to Greece to sort of Israel, Egypt, Wales, Ireland, Viking, Vinland, Dante's comedy, Templar/Cathar, Estosiland before Tudor Newfoundland, and then this is when the curse begins and all these objects are distributed. Over the course of time, when Newfoundland is just a mysterious island that makes up parts of these mythology, basically from here onwards, from Eden to Ireland, all of these times they're mythical islands from history that probably didn't actually exist, but in the context of the show, they make it Newfoundland, and so what they do is they have these objects being part of the story, the mythologies of these mythologies. And they evolve across time, so a staff that belonged to, like this, the armor of God becomes Aaron's breastplate, becomes Hercules' breastplate, becomes the armor of Achilles, becomes King Solomon's breastplate, becomes Mark Antony's Roman breastplate, becomes Arthmel's armor, becomes the bright breastplate of righteousness, becomes Witcher's armor, and now we don't know where it is. That was probably one of the worst examples, actually. But, there's a spear in every single one of these mythologies. So, except for Dante's. So these objects, they evolve over time, being different things. So anyway, look, you can look at this at your leisure. It's on Reddit. It'll be there forever. I could have filled this in more. Again, I don't have the time. I'm hoping that in showing how it's done by having solved or predicted as much of this as I have, that it'll count as a solve, even though it's probably not filled in correctly. To be honest, a lot of it's a little wishy-washy. A lot of it's sort of like, if you squint. So, I tried my best, but it's probably wrong. Okay, so this search will eventually lead to the discovery of a man named Philippe de Comines' diary. So he's a famous memoirist from the 1400s. And I believe he will be portrayed as the Burgundian that accompanied John Cabot on his excursions to Newfoundland. This is a real historical thing that a mysterious Burgundian, nobody knew who he was, accompanied John Cabot and helped him discover North America. And I believe that this diary will be written in the pages of a Redskins book that will be connected to Stephen King in some way. And I actually think a large part of the origin story of Fromland, I think that maybe the Red Book tells us the like Tudor Newfoundland, Viking Vinland, like all the times where the island is historical will be part of the Stephen King one. And then maybe the Stephen Fry one will be like the Black Book, and it will be telling the story of the mythologies before Newfoundland like is known, basically. So before the Templar arrive in Newfoundland, what's the one that's before the Templar? Yeah, so when it's the Irish fairy promised land, that's when I think Stephen Fry will be reading and narrating the story of these 7 beings across these mythologies. And I'll cover more of this later. But anyway, this is here for posterity. So I believe that echoing his or her ancestor, John Cabot, Tabitha, or Jim, because I'm still not sure which side of the Matthews family is connected to John Cabot. I think it's likely Tabitha, but it could be Jim. They will likely have to somehow heist the majority of the jewels listed above from an event of some kind at the Tower of London, likely with the help of a secretive order of Rosicrucians and modern-day celebrities. So picture this, right? Tower of London's where the crown jewels are kept. There's various jewels that will need to be collected. What if there's some sort of like exhibition at the Tower of London, and then like Frommerly have to heist it out in much the same way that John Cabot in the origin story broke Perkin Warbeck out of the Tower of London. Anyway, very tinfoil, but it would make a lot of sense. I think it would be a very beautiful narrative sort of echo, but equally it's expensive to film over Tower of London. It's a little crazy to think that a random family and a bunch of other random people would somehow be able to heist a whole bunch of jewels from one of the most secure places for storing jewels in the world. But I'm putting it out there as a tinfoil theory. Let's see. I'm putting stuff out that I know will likely be wrong, because if I get it right, it will be an amazing guess. But if I get it wrong, it was kind of crazy to begin with, so it's cool. The only thing I'm worried about is it bogging down my theory where I've made too many speculative predictions. But I just can't help myself. I'm sorry. All right, so okay, let's move on to part 5. God, we're only halfway through. This tab instead. Okay. So here is the origin story. This is what everyone is here for. This is the main story that Ethan says we need to put together. This is the origin story that explains how Fromland was created, but it does not explain the origins of the 7 monsters that helped create Fromland. So there are 2 parts to this origin story, and this is the first one. Okay, so here we go. These are all the characters that I will believe, like all the references to handsome. There's many uses of the word handsome on the show. Let me just quickly run through them. Sorry, I know I'm running out of time. Will I be handsome? Will I be rich? Obviously, that comes up a lot. God, what's her name? Trudy says that describes Jade as very handsome, which is true. Let's see. Jasmine, the monster, calls Kevin my handsome boy. What else? That's it. Okay, so but obviously it being a word used in the main theme song is gives it even more potency. So anyway, so I'll skim through these. Here they are for posterity, everyone. I haven't added anyone new or whatever. I'll probably do another version of this at the end of season 3 after a few months. I've got a few deadlines I'm working on at the moment, where I may do a version of this where I've updated it and I've say like, that was my season 2 version. Now here's my season 3 version. And we'll see how accurate I was at season 2, how accurate I was at season 3. Anyway, so just so you know, these are the 7 monsters. So these 7 beings, they start off as various biblical characters, but I'm calling them these archetypes to help us keep them straight. I could be calling the dragon Lilith this entire time. I could be calling the boogeyman Cain this entire time. I could be calling the sea monster Canaan the entire time. But I just found when I was trying to even hold all this in my own head, it became confusing. So now I'm just going with the archetype. So the archetype for the dragon, the archetype for the sea monster, archetype for the boogeyman. Sorry, guys. That's just how I'm doing it. Okay, so Oh god, this is going to take so long to read. I really thought I'd be done by now, but I've been talking around it too much. And yeah, apologies, guys, once again for having the wrong tab open for part 2 of the theory. Okay, so these are so in each timeline, the 7 beings on the show, they evolve to match the stories and beliefs of the people currently occupying their island, and they become the monsters and gods and mythical beings of that mythology. So in the timeline for Tudor Newfoundland, it is indigenous Native American mythology, which is a very sensitive topic, but it is the monsters mostly. Um, we'll see. But I think that's what's happening here. Is that it's indigenous monsters in particular, from the 3 indigenous peoples of Newfoundland, which is the Beartalk, who unfortunately are now an extinct people, wiped out by disease and being pushed out of their traditional hunting grounds and violence. The Micmac, who are still around and a very huge part of Newfoundland society, have done amazing things. And then also the Inuit peoples, who are also part of Greenland. They're also part of Newfoundland and Northeast Northeast Canada. So those are the mythologies I think that are present in this timeline. And I think, if you're representing every other mythology, if you've got Irish mythology, Welsh mythology, Norse mythology, if you're hitting every mythology, and then you do a story about Newfoundland and you don't use the mythologies of the indigenous people of Newfoundland when you're doing a whole story about the colonization of North America, and you don't use them, I actually think it would be super disrespectful not to use them for part of a story. That's just my opinion. And I'm sure that John Griffin has worked with experts in these mythologies and religions to make sure that he's totally respectful of them. So anyway, that's where I think we are here. So I'm going to read this all out loud. This is what I've been working on for the past year in my very small amount of spare time. This is what I believe the vast majority of the clues on the show are referencing. This is the main flashback that we're going to see on the show. I think everything else will be mostly montage. This will have montage in it, but this is the plot, basically. And I really do think, look, I've admitted that a lot of this stuff is going to be wrong. I'm going to be way off on several things here. This section I'm predicting is going to come out with about 70% accuracy. I genuinely think that maybe that sounds arrogant. Maybe that's a really bad bad assessment of my clue prediction abilities. It probably is, to be honest. But I so many things have told me that this is going to happen in terms of the clues I've solved. I just think it's going to happen. Anyway, let me go through it. Sorry to be drinking, but it's a long time to talk. Okay, so this whole origin story starts in the spring of 1498 before the voyage. In the late 15th century, England was emerging from the tumultuous period of the Civil Wars known as the Wars of the Roses, which is what inspired the Lannisters and the Starks, the Lancasters and the Yorks. That from Game of Thrones, that's what inspired it, just so you know. This conflict saw the houses of Lancaster and York vying for the English throne. Henry VII, a Lancastrian, finally secured the throne by defeating Richard III and marrying Elizabeth of York, Richard's niece, uniting the white and red roses. Beset by rebellions and pretenders to the throne, he is a paranoid king. So we've got this new Tudor king. He's the first in the Tudor line. He's just become king. John Cabot has just returned from a voyage discovering, and I say discovering because obviously there were indigenous peoples there already who discovered it long before he did, but discovering Newfoundland for Europe in any case, aboard the Matthew, a ship named after his depressed and seizure-prone wife, Matea. He travels with his sons Ludovico, Sebastiano, and young Sancio, and his opium-addicted brother Piero. Sancio is being tutored by Leonardo da Vinci. Yeah, I know. I didn't want to believe this too because I just thought it would be too jarring, but it kind of works. Leonardo da Vinci was notorious for letting his students finish off his work and just doing his own thing. A lot of stuff, there's still debate whether it was da Vinci or his students who made a lot of these things. So I think in this case, he's left his assistants in charge, finishing off his work, and he's got a very lucrative tutoring job where he's teaching Sancio how to paint. We'll see, but I think that's what all these Ellis paintings are related to partly. Okay. Having presented a captive Inuit translator to King Henry VII, along with the globe made by his pilot Martin Behaim, Cabot is given permission to sell a new colony to Newfoundland, and the king will provide him with prisoners to build it. He is supported by his friend and benefactor, the Augustinian friar Giovanni Carbonarius, who wishes to build a church in the New World. Cabot plans to sail with his friend and patron Richard Amarike, who is soon to be a sheriff of Bristol and is currently the king's customs officer and a salt trader with a wife and 2 daughters. Richard intends to name Newfoundland after himself, and later his stars and stripes and coat of arms will inspire Betsy Ross to make the American flag. And indeed, America will be named after him in the Law of From. Other investors may include Adriano Bardi, a banker studying to be a priest, and Jacob Fugger, which is what I think all the F word references are for, a rich gold miner. I think he's going to Newfoundland to look for gold or some sort of new mineral. Amarike has with him Icelandic thrall cooks. That's what slaves were known as in the Icelandic world, thralls, named Odd, Gurdon, and Kristen, one of whom has an affinity for bears and an occult red book called the Rouskinner. Cabot has a slave of his own, Marana, aka Marina, and he really did have a slave historically. I just want everyone to know that. Cabot is not going to be portrayed, I think, as a hero. He's going to be portrayed as a real person from his era, but I don't think the showrunners would ever portray someone who owns a slave as a hero, personally. So I think her real name will be Marana. In reality, she was written down as Marina, but it may be that they anglicized or Italianized her name. And she will be a Zoroastrian Persian quiner. That's a sort of like entertainment girl, dancing girl from the time, unfortunately. And he purchased her in Alexandria historically, and then the records show that he sold her in Crete. And it may be that he bought her back in Crete afterwards, but I think she'll be on there. There's also an Indian yogi servant of some kind who Cabot employed either through Pero de Covilla, who is a fellow explorer who he may have met in Mecca, or from a fellow explorer called Niccolo de Conti. Sorry. This is what happens when you do a live instead of recording a video. But I'm too lazy. It's just going to take too long, and I'll beat myself up too much about it if I try and get it right. So I'm just going to read through this and make some videos next year. So interestingly, at the time, Pero de Covilla and Niccolo de Conti are pretty much the only 2 people in the world who could have an Indian servant working with them, because they're the only 2 Europeans who basically like visited India, other than a few Jewish people. We'll see, Jewish traders. There's actually a long tradition of Jewish explorers who have never really been acknowledged historically, who visited some of these places long before others. I mean, Jewish people have been traveling the world long, in a migratory sort of roaming way for many, many years, even in their, biblical origin story. They wander the desert, I believe, if I'm correct there. So, I would love it if John Griffin included a Jewish explorer in this. And I think I had one written down, and then I just realized my theory was getting too long and speculative, and I didn't include them. But I would love to see one of these Jewish explorers who are unacknowledged. And actually, this guy Pero de Covilla, I believe that he actually discovered's not the right word. He, I believe, when he visited India, he interacted with 2 Jewish explorers as well. Anyway, sorry, I talked to you way too long about that section, so I'm going to blow my nose again. These allergies are killing me. Sorry, guys. Probably not very nice to watch. All right, so Rodrigo Gonzalez, Spanish ambassador. He was once a proxy in a Tudor wedding. So at the time, you could do what was called marriage by proxy, where you're in one country, the person you're marrying is in another. They're probably royals, right? Typically, who need to marry. And when I believe when Henry VIII married Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, of the 6 who Henry VIII famously had. This guy, Rodrigo Gonzalez, stood in as a proxy for Catherine of Aragon. So I believe that's why Fatima's like, I'm your proxy. Such a weird word. Why not say I'm your helper, or I'm your friend, I'm your buddy, whatever. There's so many. It's clearly a clue, guys. So this is what I think it means. So anyway, He meets Cabot and Carbonaris in the Augustinian monastery in London, where they are introduced to half-brothers Diego and Ferdinand Columbus, 2 pages from the Spanish court. Remember on the show, Jade uses the phrase 2 pages stuck together several times, and that's what they were. They were basically hostages kept in the Spanish court while their father, borrowed loads of money and did all sorts of exploration, and they were kept in the court to make sure he didn't squander their money or run away with it. So they're kind of hostages, and they resent their father for leaving them behind when he goes on his next expedition. So they go to England to travel with Cabot. So Ferdinand also, he once served with Don Juan, the famous lover, and was a bodyguard to Queen Isabel. So he's a seductor. I believe if he learned from Don Juan, he'll be a seductor. And I wonder whether that's what the Effa references on the show are, is because he sleeps with John Cabot's wife and Sansio's mother, potentially. We'll see. Okay, so the brothers join this expedition as well. Then Henry VII sends his enforcer, an undersheriff called Edmund Dudley, to keep an eye on the colony as well. He says, go on this expedition. This is the deputy archetype. And among the convicts sent to build it, there's also this guy called Wilde Humphrey Kynaston. Now, Oscar Wilde is the other reason why Wilde is constantly used by the actors in social media and posts and in the dialogue on the show, etc. Wild horses, that sort of thing. But this guy will come. He's this outrageous highway robber. And also this blacksmith called Michael Joseph. This is why Jade's surname is Herrera, which means blacksmith. He was this famous rebel. And I think in the show, they're going to have him swapped at the last minute before he was executed. And he goes to Fromland as well. I think this guy called Lord Daubney, a noble who he saved, does this swap for him and lets him go. Because he basically gets captured by his enemy, but he let his enemy go once, so maybe his enemy returns him the favor. So I don't know. Anyway, we'll see. If it plays out on the show, I'll be right, and it will make more sense. If I'm wrong, it's pointless me trying to explain it better. Okay, so John Cabot. It may also be that he was rescued by Cabot, but we'll get onto this. So look, John Cabot was famously in massive debt. He had debts for everyone, and it's actually one of the reasons why he moved to England was to get away from his debtors. He actually moved from Italy to Spain to avoid his debtors, when it's from Spain to England. So this is very speculative, but some of the historical figures that are being referenced here are people that were famously executed. And there's no way that they can form part of this story if they aren't secretly saved and come to Newfoundland with John Cabot. So I did a lot of research into John Cabot, and I learned that he had a connection to people being executed. He was part of a secretive order called the Brotherhood of St. John's the Evangelist of Death. And this religious order basically provided assistance to criminals condemned to death. So, members of this brotherhood, they would wear these white cloaks, they'd with black crosses on them, and they would go and deliver the last meal and the last rites to the condemned the day before execution. And they would recover their bodies after death, sometimes for dissection. And obviously we have that autopsy scene. So secretly what they do is they break out the condemned for a price. So they either fake their death, put them to sleep, and then when they're going to do the autopsy, they bring them back. Or they find someone who's super loyal to that person, is willing to die for them, and swap them at the last minute, and then they get executed instead. But in any case, it's like an Ocean's 11 style prison break type stuff that they're doing, because they're part of a secret order who gets access that others wouldn't. Now, Cabot is paid by various European and Burgundian leaders. Philip the Handsome is one of them. Maximilian I is another, known as the Last Knight. Margaret of York is another person. And why are they paying him to break someone out of the Tower of London? It's because Margaret of York, who I think was married to Philip the Handsome, or cousins to Philip the Handsome or something. Anyway, she was her nephew, Prince Richard of Shrewsbury, according to her, was about to be executed in the Tower of London. So who is this guy, Richard of Shrewsbury? So Richard was an heir to the throne before Henry VII won the war. So he's one of these two princes. I probably haven't explained this very well in the text, but maybe I'll make some tweaks before. Maybe I'll watch the episode 1, season 3 in this evening, and I'll make a few corrections here and there before I finalize this. But I don't think anyone will mind. It's just a few little tweaks to make things make more sense. But anyway, he claims to be one of the missing princes in the tower. So basically, before Henry VII took power, the last king actually stole the throne from these two princes, and they were imprisoned in the Tower of London and then never seen again. And then during Henry VII's time, this guy called Perkin Warbeck supposedly said, actually, I'm Richard of Shrewsbury. I escaped the tower all those years ago, and I'm the true king. So he led a rebellion against Henry VII. He lost, and then he got trapped in the Tower of London, confesses to being an imposter, and then he gets executed. But I think in the show, John Cabot is going to swap Perkin Warbeck with someone loyal to him who's going to escape themselves later, possibly via an explosion, because apparently explosives were part of Perkin Warbeck's plan to escape back in the day. And then he gets executed. There's this really good documentary here. It's sadly only available in the UK, but if you use a VPN, which I have to watch from, it tells you much of this amazing mystery and historical correction that John Griffin is trying to create. I highly recommend it. Basically, like, it gives you this amazing context for what's going on. But anyway, we'll see if I'm right. If I'm right, everyone, you should really watch this documentary if you can. All right, so the leaders send their subject, Philip de Comines, a Burgundian memorist and playwright, to make sure all goes to plan. It is his diary that Tabitha later reads. Now, this is not the first time Cabot has rescued the condemned. With him is a guy called Girolamo Savonarola, a mad priest who once ruled Florence with homophobic, puritanical zeal. He defied the Pope, failed a trial by fire, and was then burned to death. But I think in the show, what will happen is John Cabot will be paid by this guy to replace him with like a loyal follower, fanatic of his, to be burned to death in his place. And interestingly, Girolamo believed that the peaches were poisonous, and this will come up later. This will answer what the peach clues mean. So, also with Cabot is this guy called Oliver Le Dame, a notoriously corrupt barber. That's what all the hair cutting clues are from. Surgeon, executioner, and former favorite of the French kings. That's why the word favorite is overused on the show as well. He was executed supposedly for heinous deeds, but in this case, Cabot again rescues him using this secret brotherhood. He pretends to be a barber from Genoa. Famously, John Cabot had a barber from Genoa who accompanied him. We don't know his name. Who accompanies him to Newfoundland. Juan Borgia, another person John Cabot may have saved. He was the cowardly firstborn son of the Pope. He failed miserably as a soldier and was supposedly murdered by his own siblings under suspicious circumstances. Maybe John Cabot faked his death before his siblings could actually get to him. Now, with the help of his brotherhood, John Cabot breaks out Prince Richard from the Tower of London, leaving a loyal subject in his place to attempt a second escape, perhaps with explosives. Lambert Simnel, he's another pretender, a former false pretender who admitted apparently to not being who he claimed to be. He was a falconer and a kitchen boy. He's definitely involved in this, I think. He aids in the escapes. And he might actually, in the show, be the one he claimed to be, this other heir called Edward Plantagenet. But we'll see if he is or if he's the fake. We'll see. Anyway, I know that Prince Richard is the real one. But in the case of Lambert Simnel, I don't know if they're going to say that he's Edward Plantagenet or if he's genuinely a bloke called Lambert Simnel who pretended to be Edward Plantagenet. We'll see how they go. But in any case, Prince Richard must be spirited away to the New World, okay? He's too recognizable. You know, he led a rebellion. He can't stay in Europe, can't stay in England. He needs to go far, far away. They're going to send him to Newfoundland with John Cabot in this colony. But before he leaves, he rescues his Scottish wife. She's a lady in waiting. It's one of the reasons why the word wait is used so often on the show. Well, it's also it's a clue to several things. And her name was Catherine Gordon. And it's her escape is covered up out of embarrassment. She was sort of imprisoned as a lady in waiting on house arrest. And no one really knows what she did for several years while there. It's possible she escaped and then came back. Pretty much all these people I'm referencing, by the way, they go to Newfoundland in this story and then they come back and continue their lives in history. So basically they're only missing from the summer, I think May of 1498 to spring 1499, if I had to guess. So they're only away for that time period, and then they're brought back to where they came from. So Catherine Gordon probably returns to the house where she was under house arrest and goes back into prison rather than staying on the run. So next, Richard goes to rescue his sister, Princess Bridget of York. Now, Bridget of York has been sent to a nunnery at this point to keep her out of trouble and marrying someone who could later use that as a claim to the throne. She hates being a nun and wants to run away. And guys, Bridget is the main character of this story. She just is. It's all about her. The main character of the whole show is not technically Boyd, in my opinion. The main character who sits at the center of all this is Bridget of York in 1498 to 1503. So what is the story of Bridget of York? Well, she was a teenage nun at Dartford Priory. She was a princess who was sent there. And I won't explain how I know this, but this is my I did a live stream specifically about this section that you can watch if you're interested. But basically, I learned through sleuthing and internet research, and one of the funnest like clue rabbit holes I've ever been on. And I literally spent months trying to figure out who Bridget was. I knew there was a witch. I knew she was probably a teenager or an old or early 20s. And I was looking for a teenage girl of the right age with the right background to be the witch in Cabot's voyage. And I actually saw Bridget, discounted her, and then came back to her later. So anyway, there's a whole story behind that. But she begins a relationship with this guy called Henry Clifford, who was he was known as the Shepherd Lord, who was a noble who learned the ways of the cunning folk, which is a type of witchcraft from England, known to common people. When he grew up as an outlaw peasant sheep herder before being restored by Henry VII to become a noble again. Now, Clifford taught Bridget this magic, things like herbal healing, divination, throwing bones, predicting the weather, charming animals, protective magic. That's the sort of thing that they learned. And Bridget gives birth to Clifford's daughter, Agnes, having cut off all her hair to run away with him. But she is rejected. Elizabeth Cressner, the prioress of the abbey, agrees to let Bridget run away and raise Agnes in her place. Continuing to collect payments from the crown and covering up the scandal, even placing a fake gravestone. And many years later, the Shepherd Lord will arrange for Agnes to marry one of his men. That's how you connect the Shepherd Lord to Bridget, basically. Okay, so together the siblings and wife join a group of minstrels. So this is Perkin Warbeck with his sister and his wife. They join a group of minstrels, that's like entertainers, traveling troupe, that accompany the voyage. And this was pretty typical of the time. Many explorers would travel with entertainers for their men because it got pretty boring on those long Atlantic voyages. So it was pretty common for them to have some sort of musician. And I believe that Bridget might even go under an assumed name and go by Mary, given some of the carvings found in Newfoundland. So these entertainers are Johann George Faust, a legendary German musician, as well as a guy called Pierre Gringoire, a French actor, juggler, acrobat, musician, and playwright. That's the actor I couldn't remember when I was talking about Hunchback of Notre Dame. John Blank, a black trumpeter who was from Henry VII's court. Clovid the Moor, a black drummer and fiddler from James VI's court. Triboulet, and tambourinist, I think, actually. But there you go. Triboulet, a hunchback and little person who served as a jester from the French courts. And Eloy Damarvel, a singer and composer. There's also a Chinese green man, stand-up comedian and firework maker, known for Henry VII's wedding fireworks, who might assist Prince Richard's escape attempt with explosives. Now, what's interesting about this solve, about the Chinese green man, is the first ever instance of fireworks happened at Henry VII's wedding. The third ever instance of fireworks happened at a building that I look after called the Elvetham in Hampshire, for which I helped write a history book. And if I hadn't been involved with Elvetham, I would have never made this connection to the fireworks. So anyway, so I think there'll be a Chinese person there who Kenny is descended from. Okay, so let's continue. So all of these people that I've described, they all end up on a fleet of ships heading towards Newfoundland. The voyage sets off in May of 1498, and on the way, they encounter this guy called Amerigo Vespucci on his way back from Europe, back to Europe from Colombia, which he's just discovered. So there's a legend that Amerigo Vespucci discovered Colombia even before the Spanish, basically. And he will also claim to have named America after himself. That is the conventional explanation for why America is called America, by the way, because of Amerigo Vespucci. And you see on the show all these like highlighted things like tobacco, chocolate, coffee, pineapples, sweet potato. These are all things that only exist in North and South America. Mostly South America, to be honest. At that time, these things pretty much were South American. So what that means is, in order for these things to end up with Cabot, John Cabot in Newfoundland, he would have to trade with John Cabot. And also the Black Mirror that John Dee owns, he would have had to Cabot would have had to get that from Amerigo as well, because that's a South American object. So anyway, so the voyage navigates by the North Star and encounters a storm or an iceberg, maybe both, and they get marooned on Newfoundland. They shelter in these old Viking ruins that belong to Leif Erikson, one of the Vikings. And either there or elsewhere on the island, many of the artifacts Tabitha will be seeking in coming seasons are present and used throughout the story. There may also be a few animals in the background. You'll see them more in my charts, but I've listed a few of them here. A black dog, Grim, an owl, a hare/bear, crows that haunt the church, a lion's mane jellyfish. And I also think that Jacob Fugger, the guy looking for minerals, he was the richest man in the world at the time, by the way, the Fugger family. And I think that he finds a source of jade, a special type of jade that only exists in Newfoundland called like serpentine jade. Anyway, Leonardo, he designs a stone signal tower to try and attract the attention of fishermen that they can see in the distance to try and get them to rescue them. But I think a tsunami washes most of it away, just like the signal tower in season 1 gets washed away. Matea becomes addicted to opium and has an affair with Diego Columbus. This is where all the Emma Effa references are coming from. They flirt in church, just like Elgin and Sarah do, and then they share chocolate, just like Victor and Tabitha do. When this is discovered, Matea is punished with having her ears chopped off. It was called ear cropping, and she gets diagnosed with hysteria due to an imbalance of the pure humors by the horrible, evil Dr. Barber Oliver Ledame. And he proposes trepanation as a solution, which is when you basically like drill a hole in someone's head to release pressure or something. This brain surgery fails and probably drives Matea mad, which requires John Griffin to shoot her through the head to put her out of her misery. And I think that is like a botched mercy killing with a crossbow bolt that he then has to wrench out to kill her. And this earns him the hatred of his son Sancio. So soon after this, the Christians and the pagans in this camp, because remember at this time, Christianity was not ubiquitous and there were still pagans running around. People who didn't believe in any of the Abrahamic religions, pagan religions. So there's divisions between the very Christian sort of people led by the 2 priests and the pagans who are probably like sailors, prisoners, that sort of thing. So there's a choosing ceremony where people decide, do you want to go and live with the church and follow the church rules, or do you want to go live on your own over there and be the prisoners? So I think the prisoners, the sailors, and the pagans, they go live in like one big house, like colony house, a single communal dwelling. And I think the weapons are confiscated, just like how Boyd takes Randall's gun. But I think Juan Borgia, who's the soldier archetype in this story, he refuses and goes to live by himself, just like Randall does, so that he can keep this special sword that he finds. All right, so Sancio chooses to go with the pagans, blaming his father for his mother's death, and falls in love with Bridget, impregnating her, just like Ellis impregnates Fatima. John Cabot, he watches through his telescope, just like Boyd watches through his binoculars. And there's a lot of other similar scenes that mirror the present day Fromland occurring in this origin story. I could make all sorts of guesses, but I'm not going to. But like, for example, the scenes where Sarah is being like persecuted and like mistreated by the town is probably a reference to Bridget being accused of being a witch and being treated in a similar way, potentially. A hard and unexpected winter comes. Newfoundland is notoriously cold, and no one probably knew that how harsh the winter would be. In order to keep the town, safe and to keep everyone from starving and to keep the rations done, John Cabot introduces harsh rules. Maybe he even builds a guillotine in the town square, like Catri says to Boyd. And it basically means if you endanger the camp, you get killed. The problem is his very close friend Carbonaris becomes drunk, just like Frank Pratt does, falls asleep on watch, and food is stolen, just like with Elgin in season 2. So that means Cabot is forced to behead him as punishment, and he's encouraged to do this by Savonarola, the evil priest. As a consequence, Richard Emerique, he ends his friendship with John Cabot, and he goes to live with the pagans. And the insane Savonarola, he's now the new church leader. Carbonaris is dead, and now the evil priest is in charge. And it may be at some point, this is very sort of tinfoil, Martin Behaim famously studied under someone who could predict eclipses. And there's a legend that Columbus tried to trick indigenous people by saying there will be an eclipse and I will hide the sun if you don't do what I tell you. And then they're like, yeah, right. And then he knows an eclipse is coming. So when the sun is hidden, he's like, you give it to me or I'm going to keep it this way. And then they believe him. There's a legend about that. I don't know if that's true or not. There's a legend about it. And I wonder if they'll recreate that in the origin story, but have the indigenous people be like, you think we don't know about eclipses, dumbass? I think I get a feeling that's kind of what's going to happen, which is why I say They attempt to trick them. I'm not necessarily saying they will trick them. I think John Griffin is too respectful for that. Okay, so new rules and punishments begin in the Christian camp, including stocks, tarring and feathering, hair shirts. Hair shirts is why Ethan keeps talking about being itchy in his pajamas. Self-flagellation, prolonged kneeling in prayer. Catri, my knees aren't what they used to be. Vows of silence, fasting, especially over Christmas. There's gonna be some horrible like Christmas Christian traditions being shown here, I think. I think that cannibalism may even ensue after a desperate lottery. So when all the food goes missing, maybe there's cannibalism. And maybe Sancio's brother Ludovico has his leg chopped off as a result. Maybe they do a lottery, he loses the one of the boys, and he has his leg taken, and that's why we see all these references to people's injured legs on the show. And removed legs and people stepping in bear traps. I think someone in the origin story loses a leg, and I'm connecting it to cannibalism, but I may be wrong. Okay, so in the pagan camp, medieval winter solstice and Easter traditions are celebrated. So the English Yule celebration is marked by the rebirth of the sun with what was known as mummering and guising. These are also huge parts of Newfoundland modern day culture, by the way. Pretty unique, actually. Mummering isn't really done other than in a few places in England and Scotland. And Newfoundland is like a huge, like probably the home of mummering now. And there's even a show called Life of a Critch where they do a whole bunch of mummering. And I think Elizabeth Saunders and Caution Moore, they did a film about Newfoundland mummering as a horror film together. And I thought that was such a cool coincidence. I wonder if there's some sort of government grant that the show is getting from in order to promote tourism to Newfoundland, and maybe they were like, well, let's give them a grant for that other show as well. I don't know. That's very speculative. I'm sorry, but I thought I'd throw it out there. So anyway, so they do this mummering and guising, and that's where people wear masks and costumes and inside-out clothes and blankets and curtains, and they visit homes, tapping on the windows, the walls, and the doors, demanding food and drink, engaging in riddles, and making them guess who they are. Wassailing is also another tradition where they would dance around an apple tree with torchlit processions. They'd shoot guns in the air. They'd do it around apple trees and also beehives as well. They'd scare crows by hitting pans to scare them away. And they also toast from like this bowl filled with like bread and honey and spices. And they also burn a Yule log on the fire. There's also apple bobbing and turnip carving. And Bridget will probably have a pet goat who will be made the Yule goat. Now, the Yule log is basically when they chop down a tree and drag it entire into the fire, and as it burns, they just shift it along until the whole thing burns. It makes your whole house smell like pine. It's a part of this tradition, the Yule log. Nowadays, it's made into a cake that looks like a log, and that's about as far as people go with it. But back in the day, you'd chop down a Christmas tree, and you would burn it in the fire, basically, one stage at a time. So in this case, when they chop down this old tree, it's actually a fairy tree of some kind, and it's actually a tree that sprung up around a cauldron known as an ask, from another ritual fighting the boogeyman in Viking Vinland about 500 years earlier. But we'll cover that later. So what basically cutting this tree releases the monsters into Newfoundland. But because of the magic and the tradition, the pagan celebrations that they're doing, it actually protects them from a lot of the rituals that are done in the winter solstice and Easter are done to protect against evil. So all of these rituals that they're doing as part of the traditions I'm about to describe protect them, while the Christians, they get the full brunt of the bad guys. And I think that the evil priest Savonarola, he actually becomes possessed, just like Martin, just like Boyd, just like Mariel will be. So anyway, there would also be a mummers play. This is where minstrels act out stories like St. George fighting the dragon. People wear animal masks. They ride hobby horses around with horses' skulls sometimes. There's a fool and a devil who watch the performances, like making commentaries, like funny comments. There's a sailor who challenges a devil to build a bridge across the sky, who fails with clouds and cobwebs, but then he succeeds with a rainbow. There's people cross-dressing on the show. This is a clue to the cross-dressing friend of Fatima's. And there's a quack doctor in a plague mask, and you'll see people in plague masks in clues in paintings, in stickers and stuff. And he revives the hero with a sword dance with a Turkish knight played by Mirana. There's also a Venetian masquerade and carnival, including the Commedia dell'arte. This comes from the Cabot family's background in Venice, as well as an angel's walk where Bridget wears a feather cloak / wings made from a feather cloak, and she walks in a tightrope in a Columbina mask. And there may even be this sort of like witch character who gives sweets to good kids and coal or garlic to the naughty ones, known as La Befana. There'll definitely be the Dutch feast of St. Nicholas. This will be introduced by Philip de Comines, where they place dried oranges in stockings. You know, the orange was dry, is something that Victor says. And someone is dressed in red and white bishop's robes, handing out small gifts and sweets. I mean, I just think with all these Christmas traditions and pagan traditions, and John Griffin trying to show like the evolution of our traditions and how they're all connected to each other. I think that what's interesting about this is, you know, he would want to show where the like red and white Father Christmas clothing comes from, and the stocking, this idea of stockings come from. So I'm sure this will feature. What else? The French festivals of the Feast of the Asses and the Feast of the Fools. This is why people use the word ass so often on the show, an asshole. It also involved commoners wearing donkey ears, bringing a donkey to church, and throwing bullshit. God, that's probably going to get me. Well, I'm not monetized anyway, so it doesn't matter. But throwing manure at clergy for the former. And they also crown a peasant king. This is probably Lambert Simnel in this story, or Prince Richard, where the social roles are reversed in a topsy-turvy fashion. And there's mock trials of leaders. So if you've seen Hunchback of Notre Dame, the Disney musical cartoon, they have this Feast of Fools there. And all these events will really upset Savonarola. He's going to hate these pagans at this point. The Iranian Quina, she probably teaches Bridget how to dance, and she introduces something called Yowda Night, which is where they read poetry, they tell fortunes, they eat sweets, they cover their legs with blankets, they play board and card games, and they stay awake all through the night, just like everyone has to do in season 2. And they even do shadow puppetry, telling the story of the 7 labors of Rostam. This is really interesting because the 7 labors of Rostam are very similar to the 7 labors of Hercules. So I think that they're going to try and connect these, like the fact that literally Persian mythology and Greek mythology have crossover, and they're going to do that. And the shadow puppetry, this is why Fatima talks about the silhouette of her dad on the wall when he gets killed, is because that was one of the skills that a Persian Quina was intended to have at this time. So anyway, okay, so they also participate in an Icelandic kvöldvaka, or evening watch. These traditionally actually occurred in bathrooms, which is why there's several references to bathrooms on the show. Like when Kenny's bringing people from Colony House in season 1, he's like, the bathrooms through the back. And in this, they would it would be, basically they'd play games, poems, riddles, do nursery rhymes, stories. They would tell stories. They would knit, make tools, read scripture, play music on a violin. Probably John Blank in this situation because he was a famous violinist. And they would preserve food in a communal space under the light of a single ceremonial torch. Also, the Inuit translator I was talking about earlier, they would probably do the Inuit blanket toss celebration, Nalukatak. This is where a blanket is stretched out by several people like a trampoline, and then you have to bounce as high as you can. Its origins are actually hunting, where they would literally stretch out a blanket and someone would bounce up and down to see how high they could jump, to see how far they could see, to see if they could spot a caribou to hunt or something like that. And what's interesting is, you know, there's so many blanket references on the show. You know, absolutely has to be a blanket as being a clue. People always talking about getting like isn't it interesting that Frank Pratt says that Megan was always asking to go higher and higher when he was on the swing, when she was on the swing. You know, I think that's a clue to this. Also, Michael Joseph introduces Nickanon Night, a Cornish tradition. So this is where the pancakes come from, guys. There's a Cornish tradition where you have pancakes and pea soup, and you also do hurling, ding-dong ditching, and you burn an effigy. So I think this is why people say stuff like easy peasy on the show, enough with the mushy, calling each other sweet pea. Those are clues to peas. So this is Nickanon Night. That's one of the things that they do in Newfoundland in 1498. Catherine Gordon introduces Hogmanay, a Scottish tradition where you like have to be the first foot across a threshold. Where the first visitor of the new year brings gifts such as coal and salt. There's fire dances and fireballs are performed. And then there's also going to be Chinese New Year. Remember the Chinese New Year, Chinese Zodiac on the T-shirt that that Trudy steals from Julie. That is a clue to Chinese New Year. They will be celebrating the Year of the Goat in 1498. Isn't that interesting? And there will be fireworks and dragon and lion dances. Also, St. David's Day from Wales, introduced by Richard Amarike. This is why we see daffodils on the show and leeks. They would use daffodils and leeks to decorate the St. David's Day. And there would be poetry competitions as well. And then there's also a few others. The Indian fakir will do Makar Sankranti, which is a Hindu festival which involves flying kites. Martin Behaim introduces the German Easter hare tradition. This is what the rabbit references are in partly to do with egg hunts around the home or garden. Naughty or nice judgment as well was part of that tradition, and also a game of hide the pickle. This is from when Jade bangs the bell and he's like, "Pickle, cucumbers, come get your cucumbers." I think that's a clue to hide the pickle. And April Fools, you'll notice on the calendar in Donna's room, it's like the day after the last day of March is like a new box. I think that's a clue to April 1st. January, February, March, April, right? So it's like a how many days does March have? 30 days have September, April, June. Yeah, so it's like it's the 32nd of March. I think that's a clue to April Fools. Okay, what else? There's also gonna be ghost stories told. So all these Inuit mythological beings, the average person won't recognize them. So someone's gonna have to explain it. So I think the Inuit translator will probably tell a bunch of ghost stories about all the mythological beings that may appear here. Now I've hedged my bets. Unfortunately, by coincidence, there seem to be clues, like keywords connected to quite a few Inuit mythological beings, and I wish I cut this down now, to be honest, but I've hedged my bets. I've said all the ones that they might be of the 7 beings, and they're across here, and the fairies. So yeah, nearby 7 beings take the shape of animals that live in the forest, as well as some fairy-like servants. Those listening began to take on these forms. They listen to the stories if they aren't in them already. Now, during these celebrations, Bridget kisses another girl, just like Fatima kisses that redhead. And one of Sancio's brothers sees her doing this and asks for a kiss too, and this is rejected. Later, this brother returns to Savonarola, tells him about the homosexual kiss during confession, and Savonarola promises not to tell anyone, but he does. A spontaneous, unofficiated pagan wedding happens between Sancio and Bridget, John Cabot's son, earning the hatred of Savonarola, who's in love with her. Sancio's brothers, Juan Borgia, Edmund Dudley, and all the others, they're all in love with Bridget. Just like in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, everyone's in love with Esmeralda. So John Cabot attends this wedding at the last minute, just like Boyd does. They jump over a broom, use a special thread, like that's part of pagan hand fasting marriage rituals. They also do a ceremony called calling the 4 quarters, which is related to like north, east, west, and south. And they use John Cabot's compass. And the elements are also honored with each, with different elements. This is why elementary high school comes in. So I think the jade that Fugger finds, the crow feathers represent air, maybe a seashell represents water. This is actually the Cabot coat of arms, and fire for candles. There's also going to be the Venetian marriage of the sea, which has them casting a ring into the sea. It's like a Venetian tradition, and then it's recovered by a fisherman, maybe a Basque or Norman fisherman, or a whaler perhaps. And then Leonardo da Vinci, he paints Bridget, and then later he paints over it to create the Salvator Mundi painting, the one of Jesus that sold for like billions. I think that's going to be like an actual thing on the show. And that, like, everyone's always said the Salvator Mundi sort of looks like maybe it was a woman first when he turned it into Jesus. Well, I think that woman is Bridget in this case, and then later he turns it into Jesus to make it sellable. Okay. So, sorry, just finding it hard to breathe. Okay, and sketches. Yes, and also the Last Supper. He may sketch a Last Supper of sorts with Sancio's brother as Judas, and then later he'll use that to update the Last Supper mural that he did in Italy when he returns back. So Easter Sunday, what was really interesting is that people didn't celebrate their birthdays back then. What they did is they celebrated their saints' days. And interestingly, Sancio, because his name is Sancio, it means that he was born on a saint's day. So he's not only celebrating his saint's day, but his birthday at the same time. This is why Fatima says that the men came for her dad on her birthday. And it happens on the day as well that she was visiting her uncle. So I imagine Bridget and Sancio for his birthday, for his Saint's Day, are visiting Sancio's uncle Piero. When they arrive, Savonarola, he gets Sancio's brothers to bang on the door, just like Mr. Liu thinks his brothers are banging on the door. He's having flashes of memory from Bridget, maybe. Now Savonarola, who has begun to be haunted by the main evil, maybe possessed by him, we'll call him the boogeyman. He's waiting for them and accuses them of witchcraft. So there will also be Shakespearean events throughout this. The one I'm most excited for, that I don't know if this is going to happen, but I feel like it would be really clever if they did, especially with the bear trap. And Victor made some bear references in his last interview. There's a famous quote from Shakespeare: "Exit stage left, pursued by a bear." I think at some point someone's going to get chased by a bear and go running to the left of the screen. And also I think someone's going to lift a skull similar to Hamlet. I think we've kind of seen something like that already, but I think we'll get a more obvious one. And at some point they will find secret Templar and Cathar treasures, including many religious artifacts, perhaps hidden in a mountain waterfall cave. Now I will get onto this in the next section. Anyway, God, this is taking long to get through. All right, so summer 1499, the witch trial. So the trio are accused of various acts, including stealing milk with an axe handle, homosexual acts for sure, and causing Mater and others to have seizures. There's list making, property confiscation, interrogations involving stripping and checking for witches' marks, a trial by recitation of scripture, a witch's cake made with urine and fed to a dog. I think there's also forced cleaning. Oh, I forgot to add. Oh, no, here it is. They're subject to tortures following the protocol. Remember, Donna's like, we have a protocol. The protocol of the Hammer of Witches, which is Savonarola's favorite book. It's also a #1 bestseller at the time. And remember how Katri talks about there's no Bible, but there are bestsellers. He's following the Hammer of Witches. And there's so many people holding hammers in the background on this show. I'm pretty certain of this. Anyway, so these include being strapped to a bed, scrubbed clean, scratching, pricking, branding, sleep deprivation, Scold's Bridle, Tongue Terror, Heretic's Fork, Head Crushing, Spiked Chair, Pressing with Boulders, Thumb Screws, Water Cure, Dunking, Scavenger's Daughter, Rat Torture, Burning, Penalty of the Peach. I think we're literally going to see a whole montage of horrific tortures done to 3 people accused of witchcraft. And there's so many clues to this on the show that it's undeniable for me at this point. Anyway, we'll see. Later in modern day Fromland, the boogeyman sends peaches for Victor to eat as a reminder of this event to Bridget. I'll explain this in a bit more detail later. But that is what all the peach references are on the show. And the penalty of the peach, for those of you that don't know, is when you basically like grind down peach pits into powder and then make someone eat them until they get cyanide poisoning. So you eat peach pit powder until you die of cyanide poisoning. That was what the penalty of the peach was called. So Sancio is probably killed by his brother, because I've seen a few people killing their brothers on this show, like references to that. And he's probably another accused witch. I wouldn't be surprised if Sancio is the one who endures the penalty of the peach. It's also discovered that Bridget is pregnant before she can be killed. So they start torturing her, but then they're like, oh, she's pregnant. We don't kill babies, unborn babies, whatever their view is of that. So she's kept in prison until she can give birth. And then she gives birth via cesarean, just like I think Fatima will in season 3, and has her son taken from her, potentially what might happen to Fatima as well. She's hung in the forest with what's called a strappado. So I think on the show, we're going to get a lot of people saying things hurt their armpits, things hurt their shoulders. People are going to dislocate their shoulders. We know that Ethan says his armpit hurts when he's with the crutch. I think Jade hurts his shoulder when Boyd like grabs him at the choosing ceremony. We've got Ellis dislocating his shoulder. So anyway, I think these are clues to the strappado. That's when I think she gets left in the forest with her like arms. She's literally held by her arms that are being stretched behind her back, dislocates her shoulders, and she's left to die like that. But then her guard is tricked by Juan Borgia. Remember, he lives alone because he wanted to keep his sword, and they've kind of forgotten about him. So he comes back, tricks her guard, maybe knocks him out, and frees her. And then together, remember, he's in love with her as well. Together, they go and live with the Beartalk in the woods, and they learn about 2 of the evils, what they're representing. So the boogeyman's current form is like Mudim, and his son Canaan, who is the sea monster, is in the form of a jellyfish, which is a native Newfoundland red animal. Okay, so in 1499, William Weston, a British explorer, history is all but forgotten, who came on Cabot's 1497 expedition, he returns to Newfoundland, rescuing most of the colonists and returning them home to continue their lives in history. Savonarola chooses to remain, now possessed by the boogeyman and keeping the witch's son. During this time, Philip de Comines finishes his memoir of the events there, writing the margins of pages of 2 books, or maybe just one black, one red. I think it's the red one. Back in Portugal, Martin Behaim, who's married to the explorer Corte Real family's sister-in-law. So this is a really interesting coincidence. Martin Behaim was friends with the Corte Reals, who are the next batch of people who historically visited Newfoundland. And he asked them to go to Newfoundland to rescue Bridget, perhaps. Or I don't know what reason, but he sends them. Gaspar arrives in 1502 with his soldiers. He enslaved many of the Beartalk, and there's a massacre. And then Bridget, and this happened historically. He did kidnap Beartalk people and brought them back to Spain, and all the Beartalk died. The ones he brought back, they all died. Bridget and Juan survived this massacre. With nowhere left to go, they decide to try and rescue Bridget's son. They face off against him using the artifacts that I mentioned previously. I think Juan probably fights a dragon-like monster at some point, potentially, but we don't know. Bridget prepares a trap for all the evil beings, perhaps in the church, and she does all this cunning folk magic. So she hides a sandal, she hides a wedding dress, she hides a dried cat mummy she found. Believe it or not, dried dead cats were a thing people used to bury in their home to protect evil. She also buries a horse's skull that was used in the Mummers play. Again, it has a very long history. Originally, it was Pegasus, I think. She also prepares a witch's ladder. This is the thing that Jade's looking at in the trailer for season 3. It's a clue to a witch's ladder, using a loom, a bundle of thread, human hair, violin string. She ties on an emerald, her ring, a pearl earring, her goat's bell, a gold tooth, a Yule pomander, a poppet, that's like a type of doll made from a Yule doll, an evil eye charm, a hamster hand charm, a rabbit's foot, a rowan seed rosary. All these objects that have been mentioned up until now, they will be used in this witch's ladder. And many of these have a history that's older than the current timeline, but we'll get onto that later. Now, Bridget makes a witch's bottle. That was a real thing that they used to make to protect their home. And she buries it inside an iron cauldron or teapot after brewing a potion, filling it with the 4 humors, which may include the urine or witch's cake in place of bile, oil as black bile, blood and phlegm as blood and phlegm. A dried heart she found. Witches' bottles often contained animal hearts of some kind. In this case, I think the heart will be Robert the Bruce's heart, but I'll get onto that later. The 4 elements used in her wedding: nails she found, broken glass, salt. And she also uses like a symbol or a seal she found. I think it's the John Dee's like Solomon seal thing. And she writes symbols on the walls. These are the symbols that we see on the show that are like Icelandic. She gets them from that red book. Maybe. Bridget also faces the boogeyman and his servants, and she challenges him. She tempts him with a game like death. Game like chess. You know how there's this thing where like you see death and you challenge him to a game of chess, and if you beat him, you get to live. Well, I think she does something similar. I don't think that she and the boogeyman can understand each other necessarily, but she spreads out all these games. You know, maybe in the church, she opens the door and invites him in, and she basically makes a bet with him. I beat you in a game, I get my son back. Okay, and these are all the games that they brought with them to Newfoundland to pass the time. This is a game of tarot cards with Triumphi. This is a game of various board games like Pachisi, like Game of Goose, like Chaturaji, all medieval games. Okay, I've also got some like wild sort of tinfoil stuff that maybe Bridget's son gets split into 2 to make 4 players for the game. So it's Bridget, Savonarola, her son, and her son's evil twin, and each gets possessed by one of the 4 players. And maybe there's like 3 other people observing, but I don't know. Maybe the 3 people observing are the 3 are the Indian, the Chinese person, and the Persian person. Maybe those are the 3, because none of them are actually like real historical figures that we know what happens to them. I've sort of had to bodge their existence into a being, and I think the showrunners have too. So I do wonder whether they're unnamed people. So I wonder whether they're the 3 observers. So anyway, we'll see. I'm going to get frustrated, I'm sure, as time goes by, where things that I've thought of historically, but I forgot to include in my theory and then turn out to be right, will be really annoying for me. But I'm gonna stick to my guns, and I'm not going to edit this at all after today. I may go through and make a few little tweaks here and there before I watch the final episode of season 3. I may not even be able to watch season 3's first episode until tomorrow, unfortunately. We'll see how that goes. It's pretty hard for me to watch it from the UK. So anyway, Bridget springs her trap, but it doesn't go perfectly. So the 7 beings and their avatars are shrunk down and they're sort of sucked into the bottle, but something goes wrong. So Bridget and her, maybe the like monster grabs her on its way into the bottle, and she gets pulled in with her sons, and this creates the world of Fromland. So then Gaspar's men, they arrive like a year or 2 after this. They raid the church. They find all these jewels and artifacts, part of this witch's bottle, and it weakens the spell that's sealing all these beings in place. And it allows them to start sucking in more people from the curse. They probably break the top of the bottle like we see in the From movie poster. But in any case, Gaspar, he's a real historical Portuguese explorer, a Portuguese conquistador who came to Newfoundland and he disappeared. No one, only two of his ships returned to Portugal, but his ship was never seen again. So anyway, so these two ships, they leave with all these artifacts and they arrive back in Italy. And according to history, this old broken sword and earrings were all they found. But I think in reality, they were just lying so they could keep all these jewels. But they get found out. Behaim connects all the artifacts and then passes them to Leonardo da Vinci before he dies, because he's a very old man at this point. Then Da Vinci decides to found a Rosicrucian order alongside Erasmus, the famous humanitarian, probably the most moral person in the world at the time. And he may be in a love triangle with Erasmus and Thomas More, because famously Da Vinci may have been a homosexual, and equally so too may Erasmus and Thomas More. And I would love that. I think it'd be really cool. The order is based on the principles of the three magi from the east. So in this case, I think it'll be the Indian fakir, the Persian quiner, and the Chinese green man. So it is this order's job to protect the artifacts. So what comes next? So then, later, and again, this happened in history. Gaspar's brother Miguel, he comes looking for his brother, and he doesn't come back at all. And his ship is sucked into Fromland too. So the boogeyman begins to basically capture people from North America, cursing the bloodlines of those involved in the origin story and their archetypes, such as soldiers, sheriffs, lawmen, rebels/outlaws, criminals, prisoners, shamans, witches, clowns, dancers, singers, drummers, actors, musicians, poets, explorers, inventors, super wealthy, and priests, often are originating around massacres and times of people from around the world getting together, replicating their roles, and a warped sort of repeating cycle of the sequence of events in the Cabot origin story. So Fatima, Kenny, Katri, and Boyd, plus Elgin, plus Bacta, are descended from the Persian quiner, the Chinese greenman, the Indian fakir, and John Blank, respectively. Tabitha's family, and therefore Victor's, are descended from Cabot via Sebastian. So I think a metaphorical version of the games from the bet are played, with the board games and their various hazards and tiles and stops. Just like a game of Monopoly has those tiles that you land on, I think in the same way, these tiles become the landscape and the objects and the buildings of Fromland, with the game pieces and the cards portrayed by those stuck in Fromland, including the monsters. So more on this later. So anyway, 1503, we find Bridget and her sons or son, and maybe the Corte Reals, the Portuguese conquistadors, in Fromland. Bridget dies in Fromland when she's much older, eventually becomes the largest tree in Fromland. That's the giant tree we see in the corner of Victor's map, helping where she can. She's the female voice trying to help. The giant tree could be what keeps the boogeyman perpetually trapped in Fromland, just like the tree in The Tempest from Shakespeare is what keeps Ariel, the spirit, trapped. And maybe his soul is trapped beneath among the roots. So maybe her son, and maybe he's an evil twin, maybe he's not. Maybe her son, the boy in white, is another ghost trapped in Fromland. So all these characters have died now. And their souls are trapped in Fromland in this bottle. And when you die, you turn into a tree. So unlike the others who live out in the forest, his clothes are clean because he lives with the bad team who keep him away from Bridget. Basically, in order to make Bridget suffer, even though she's a soul in a tree in Fromland, they make it so that she can never see her son, the boy in white. And that's why his clothes are so clean. In fact, I think, and that's why he's always followed by this dog. I think Loup Garou is like his guard. One of the seven beings is guarding him constantly to make sure that Bridget can't get to him. And I think any ghost with white clothes in good condition is probably working with the bad team, or anyone with white clothes in bad condition, they're sort of the ghost rebellion trying to defeat the boogeyman who mistreats them in this place. Okay, so Bridget's being kept from her son, the boy in white. This is why Mr. Liu yells, "I want to see my son" in episode 1. He's repeating what he's hearing. Bridget is screaming, "I want to see my son," and he's just repeating it. She's missing the boy in white. It's also possible that sometimes the boy in white escapes his killer, Loup Garou, the dog, and tries to help, but he also has to do what he's told when the dog is around. So his motives are extremely confusing and mysterious, and I don't think we're going to really get to the bottom of it. But I think the ultimate answer is it's mixed, and it's because he's forced to do things sometimes, but he wants to be a good person as well. Okay. And remember, he's been raised by the monsters, so, he's probably got some issues. All right, so I imagine in season 3, we will meet an older lady in white, Bridget. I imagine she lives for another, 20 years in Fromland before she dies. So she'll have dirty clothes. She'll be the leader of the ghost rebellion against the boogeyman. And I think her opponent ghost may be the man in white, played by Michael Emerson from Lost, like I mentioned earlier. And he will be another historical figure, perhaps the priest Savonarola. So either way, Bridget is still around in Fromland, one way or another. If she isn't Donna, if Donna isn't somehow the immortal Bridget of York, which is like a sort of tinfoil theory I have that I've deleted because I think this is more likely. But either way, Bridget is definitely still in Fromland because the peach truck was sent into Fromland to remind Bridget of the penalty of the peach, which killed someone that she loved. All right. So we're getting closer to the end now, guys. Don't worry. So now we're doing part 6. Okay, so now I'm going to try and explain a little bit about why the monsters are the way they are. So modern day Cape Race Lighthouse, the curse is now buried within Cape Race Lighthouse in the middle of the stairs. This is why Kenny and Katria are on the stairs and this guy's coming down the stairs and he's like, can you not sit in the middle of the stairs? I think that's a clue to where the curse is located. So I think it's in the middle, probably in the center, buried underground. Sorry. So I think the lighthouse was built over the top of it. This is the lighthouse with the only hyperradial Fresnel lens in Canada. So only 33 were ever made worldwide. Only 12 survive still in use, and this is one of them. It has an oil fire light, just like the one in the that we see in Fromland. It has a rare clockwork mechanism, and that's a real clockwork mechanism that they paid someone to make. You know, why would you include this clockwork mechanism just for a single shot that you could have animated? I think it's because it's actually an important part of the mythology. It's one of the few lighthouses in Canada that work via clockwork. And then the lens at Cape Race floats on 7 gallons of liquid mercury. And apparently there's a number plate with the word mercury on it. And I think there's probably something hidden inside the mercury, but we'll find out. Maybe it's the bottle. Who knows? It also had the important thing about Cape Race Lighthouse is actually related to the radio tower that was built there. And it's one of the most famous radio towers in the world, has one of the most interesting radio tower histories in the world, and we obviously see a lot of radio references on the show. So this was opened by a guy called Marconi. He's actually one of the people in my like chain of people passing objects across time. And he built this radio station in 1904 and it operated until 1967. And I think what's happening here, you know, the boogeyman can use the radio and the phone for this reason. But I think he can only he can't, I think there's like rules to it. The curse is limited to North America because in 1904, when the curse started getting radio signals because the radio station was built above it from both Canada and the United States, it split into 2. With one side of the board game table, so I think there's multiple board games being played here with like different, just like that crokinole board that we keep seeing. So I think that the Canadian town is on one side, the US town is on the other. The US, it's actually more like a mirror world more than anything. So it's like the US version is the mirror world of Canada. And so when Boyd sees that ruin after he's in Martin's prison, it's because in the US mirror world, it's been ruined, but in the Canadian world, it hasn't. So I don't think it's time travel he does there. I actually think it's it's more related to that, but we'll see. I really don't like the whole Martin dream sequence stuff. It really confuses me, but we'll see. All right. So anyway, the boogeyman, how he takes people in this new era is radio waves, I think. So using a vehicle's radio. And I think that's why people are always waving on the show. It's a clue to radio waves in some way, like constant waving. Tabitha was left in Maine because it's the closest part of the USA to Cape Race Lighthouse. I mean, literally, if you did a beeline to get to the nearest US territory, it would be to Maine. The monsters are currently in the form of Newfoundland fairies who are known to imitate normal people. They created their illusions based on the stereotypical sitcom and radio drama characters of that era. So like milkmen were a TV trope back then. And that's why, you know, they're in black and white. They watch it in black and white in the caves because it was only 1960s when color TV came. So they have a little bit of color, but it's mostly blacks and grays. And when the radio station shut down in 1965, their illusions froze. No more TV. These are the illusions we've been working on. We're going to stick with them. So that's why they're always wearing grays, blacks, and whites. It's why Jasmine, when she gets some red blood on her, she tries to clean it off. It's because of the color. It's not because of the blood itself. It's because of the color that she can see. It ruins her illusion. She's supposed to be all gray and black and white. So at some point on the show, we may also hear the Titanic SOS, like Cape Race famously did. Cape Race is famous for the Titanic and how it helped coordinate the rescue. And I also wonder if Tabitha or Donna may drop a jewel in the ocean to echo the Titanic's Heart of the Ocean scene from the film. I also have a kind of speculative theory that I'll just skim through very briefly. The guy who built Cape Race was this guy called Henry Spurt, who has connections to Sebastian Cabot and is part of like the secretive sort of order or of like lighthouse keepers and fishermen. So I wonder if he performs part of this mythology, but I'm just going to leave that there. I don't want to get it. You know, I realize, you know, anyone who's watching this is probably, you know, their eyes have glazed over by now. But yeah, okay. Let me just very quickly go through the games of Fromland. Inside this witch's bottle, the landscape is the board games, as I've discussed. The victims of Fromland become various cards, items, and game pieces that the 4 players use in their game. So these games include Triumphi slash Chirochi, Pachisi, Game of Goose, Chatterargi, Go, Fox and Geese, Nod slash Backgammon, Teetotum, and then also like other sort of miscellaneous kids games and toys like circle dancing, singing bridge games, hopscotch, lacrosse, curling, stool ball slash basketball, and a drinking game. I don't know. I think there'll be toys and stuff as well that I'm not including. It's just too esoteric for me to include. Don't know how it would work. The primary game here is Triumphi, which is using tarot cards. Now, tarot cards in the modern times are used in an esoteric way to see the future. They have the futures not ours to see in the intro song, but they were first used as playing cards. Cups, swords, wands, and coins became our modern suits of hearts, clubs, spades and diamonds. So those arriving in the town, they become metaphorical versions of these tarot cards. This means the number of citizens is capped at 78 cards, and when people die, this number is replenished. And these are the characters on the show. I'm not going to run through them all because I realize I'm taking too long, but here you go. These are my assignments currently. There's going to be a couple of these that are wrong. I don't know. Martin, does he count? Probably. I don't know. Anyway, we'll see. So the 4 players take turns picking people from the real world. The good team chooses people who are about to die. So, people about to kill themselves by suicide, disease might kill them. And also people who will inspire hope. People like Fatima, Katri, maybe Tilly. I don't know. The bad team chooses people who are about to live. So Jade's just sold his company, about to enjoy the fruits of his labor. Bacta's graduating, Boyd's retiring, all these people about to start enjoying their lives, and then they're snatched away and taken to Fromland. And obviously, he also chooses people who are descended from Fromland. Maybe the good team does too. I don't know. But, I've never seen a show that mentions so many grandparents, guys. Like, it's definitely got some sort of ancestral connection to it. Okay, here are the board games. The board games are on a double-sided game table with multiple games on each, much like the Crokinole board we see in the background. I believe one side is the American Mirror World, the other side Canadian, with different games played on both sides. Now, this one I only finally saw recently. Refskak is Icelandic fox and geese, or fox chess. In this game, 12 lambs must trap a much more agile fox. The fox wins if he traps 7 lambs, and this represents the 7 children sacrificed in the Viking timeline, and also the 7 children sacrificed to the Minotaur. He does a brief stint as a Minotaur, spoilers. And that was sacrificed to him as well. The 7 children we see are the souls of the 7 children from the 1930s timeline. The boogeyman is playing the role of the fox here. There's also Pachisi, which is where talismans come from. In this cross-shaped game, we see a lot of cross shapes of the town in various posters and things. There are 14 colors. In this game, it's yellow, blue, red, and black. The game literally means 25 in Hindi. We see 25 all the time. The board has a central home column, and we know the tower sends you home. There's 12 safe places where a pawn cannot be captured, known as the castles. I think that these talismans, the 12 talismans are these game pieces. That's why the monsters can't hurt them inside the house, because like the spaces surrounding that game piece in Pachisi, if you land your piece there, they can't be taken. They also had 7 cowrie shell dice. I don't know if the children in white have a dice. I think that's a step too far, but I'm throwing it out there. There's also Game of Goose. So Pachisi was almost always a reversible board game, and on the other side of Pachisi was always the Game of Goose, pretty much. The Game of Goose is the most important board game on the show. It has eggs instead of squares. The egg in Megan's room, the egg in Vix's lunchbox. I guess I did include a few clues here. It has several hazards, including a hotel. So the hotel sign that has no hotel there means the entire street is the hotel. The prison is Martin's prison. The well is the oubliette that Boyd wakes up in season 2. There's a labyrinth. Jade uses a thread like the Minotaur labyrinth in the story, so that's clearly the caves. So I think we're going to see a tomb and a bridge. I think the tomb is the ruin that Jade will see in season 3 that we know from some of the descriptions of the later episodes. And the bridge, I don't know when we'll see it. Maybe that's how you get to the Canadian town. I don't know. We'll see. There's also Chatterargi. So did you notice in the tarot cards, all 4 kings were missing? I think this is because the 4 kings metaphors in this game are the 4 kings in this chess game of Chatterargi. It was a 4-player chess. And again, this is in 4 colors, and there are elephants, soldiers, horses, and ships, all of which are clues on the show. Okay. Then we have Game of Life / Leela. This one I'm a little less sure on these days, but I'm keeping it anyway. It's basically a modern version of Snakes and Ladders, but it's more to do about karma. Teetotum is like a spinning top, just like a dreidel, basically, but in multicolors. and you can use it like a spinning wheel to like it's almost like a dice in a way. You spin it to land on a color. There's also this game called Go. People use the word Go all the time on the show. So yeah, I think if you've heard of Go, I'm not sure how it applies actually, but if you see red and black white rocks scattered everywhere, that's what they represent. There's these getting out before the music stops, maybe a reference to like a London Bridge is falling down type game, of which there are many versions before London Bridge was even a thing. And also Tangram, it's like a Chinese puzzle where you take these glass shapes and you try and form new animal shapes with it. I think that might be a part of it. Grandmother's Footsteps. I think that the monsters might be playing a version of a game called Grandmother's Footsteps, which is it's kind of like it's when they can only walk when someone's watching, but if no one's watching, they can move super fast or they can fly, but only when no one can see. I think that's how they get Catry when he's not looking. I think this explains how Smiley moves so fast when Ellis falls from the roof. You may remember this more. You may think of this as like red light, green light from Squid Game, but with walking instead of stopping and sprinting instead of running or something. Anyway, the drinking game, this is the four humors thing I talked about, the liquids that they're gathering. I think they may be playing a drinking game where when your receptacle is full, whoever fills it first or something has to drink it. I don't know what it will be, but we'll see. But I think that might be part of it as well, some sort of drinking game. Okay. One. Don't worry, guys, we're getting close now. Okay, so part 7, the secret orders. So back to the present in the real world. Let's see. Tabitha and Fromley encounter 2 secret orders. One is good, one is bad, and the third might even be Nazis. But this third one may no longer exist in the modern day, but there's certainly a Nazi component to this. So all 3 of these secret orders, which I'll come on to later, are descended from this guy called Christian Rosencrantz, which is clearly an invented name. He was rumored to be a Cathar, which is like a persecuted religious order that the church persecuted. And he's the mysterious founder of an organization called the Rosicrucians, a secret society dedicated to esoteric knowledge and the betterment of humanity. Sure sounds a lot like Erasmus to me. And they were obsessed with finding the Philosopher's Stone as well. So it all connects, it all syncs together. So nobody knows much about this guy. We just know that his name was made up because it literally means Rosy Cross. Sorry. All we know is that the order comes from around the 14th and 15th century, which is when the Cabot expedition happens. And it was based on knowledge from 3 magi from the East and the Book of M. And isn't it interesting that on Victor's lunchbox, there's an M, what looks like an M in orange there. And I've identified 3 magi from the East, right? China's the East, India's the East, Persia's the East. So maybe that's like what they're saying is this is the origin story. The 3, maybe is based on their knowledge, but the 3 end up being the other 3 avatars in Bridget's version. But anyway, I think that the knowledge of these 3 people are part of the founding of the secret order. Also, just a little side note, there's a famous legend about his crypt that may come into the show in some way, but I'm not going to read it out. Anyway, so these are the secret orders. So there's the Golden Dawn. That's a 19th century Rosicrucian order. Aleister Crowley, some of you may have heard of him. He was one of the earliest and most famous members, and he worshipped Baphomet. And he was kicked out, literally kicked down the stairs, in fact, after trying to take power from the Golden Dawn from its leaders. He basically like arrived with all these like objects, and he was like, these are magical objects, and I will defeat you. And they're like, that's rubbish. And they just kicked him down the stairs and embarrassed him. So then he went off and started his own order. And I actually think we're going to see this. Now, interestingly, all of these famous authors, all of them were members of the Golden Dawn. Even Bram Stoker was associated with the Golden Dawn, which is why I think where I think some of the vampire references are coming from. So we may even meet these characters. Maybe one of the main characters even time travels back in time, leaves Fromland, then leaves Fromland back in time, and then meets all these people. Maybe, I don't know. Anyway, so the Golden Dawn dissolves with Aleister Crowley as being kicked out. And so it splits into 2. So the bad order is these guys called the Otto, okay, and they were a Nazi connected order founded by a guy called Theodor Roos, who was their leader, and he was rumored to have ties to like Nazi intelligence and fascist movements. He was involved in like secret service operations for the Germans, and he may have even inspired some Nazi ideologies. And Aleister Crowley started the British version of Otto. He founded the British Wing. So I think this might be the bad order who might hunt Fromley in the real world. And then the good order was set up by this guy called A.E. Waite. Again, this is why Waite is used so often on the show, after the Golden Dawn broke down. And his order was called the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross. It still exists today. I wonder how they'll react to seeing their order used as a fictional sort of group. But anyway, A.E. Waite, he developed the Rider-Waite modern-day tarot deck. So isn't that interesting? He wrote about the Holy Grail, alchemy, and fairies. H.P. Lovecraft named a character after him. And Waite was also a member of the modern Knights Templar. And all of these things are connected to things that we're about to learn. And again, some of these other people up here, they will join them. So they're going to be split between these two orders. And the reason why the modern day tarot card, so remember, in the 1800s, or maybe 1900s, A.E. Waite designed a final pack of tarot cards saying this is what they will always look different. They always look slightly different until he was like, no, this is the final version, the Rider-Waite tarot deck. So how is it that the clues that we're seeing for tarot cards that might have been used in the origin story in Newfoundland, how is it that these card sets were invented hundreds of years later? How can they connect? Well, what if Waite has dreams of the tarot cards that Bridget used in the curse that created Fromland, and that's why they match so perfectly, because he based his cards based on dreams he had of the ones that Bridget used, and that's why they're the same sets, even though he invented them technically hundreds of years later. So anyway, so he sets these cards in stone, and if he does have an artifact, it's probably fragments of Jesus's cross. I'll come on to those later. I also think the wands, cups, pentacles, and swords that are the suits of tarot that were created by Waite, I think these might actually connect to the artifacts and rituals in the origin story. So here's what I think they might mean. And then there's also an evil order. Now, this is very speculative, but in the 1950s, a very bad Nazi order could be descended from this order called the Black Sun. They were like an occult sort of Himmler group. And they also, there was an organization called the Spider, which helped Nazi officers escape after World War II. But what I definitely know will come up is this guy called Otto Rahn. He was and this is the most contradictory, weirdest character I've ever encountered in my life. He was a Jewish gay SS Nazi officer named who searched for the Holy Grail for Himmler. And he believed that the Holy Grail was in fact an emerald stone that belonged to the Cathars, who were persecuted in France by the Catholic Church. And perhaps his visit, and perhaps it will also involve Otto Rahn's visit to Iceland to find this Grail. He went to Iceland. It may involve a Nazi weather station in Canada. It's literally the only time Nazis set foot on American soil during the war. North American soil was this weather station in Canada. And he may even hide a Nazi bell inside the Mercury of Cape Race Lighthouse. There's a big, there's something called Die Glock in Nazi occult like legend, from people who believe the Nazis were like studying occult, and it was called the bell. So maybe there's a legendary bell that he collects or something. Anyway, what does this mean for Fromley? Well, what I think will happen is Fromley will eventually connect with these modern day Rosicrucian orders. And there may even be these celebrity cameos that I said, Stephen King, Neil Gaiman, or Tim Burton, Neil deGrasse Tyson, I think will be one. Jordan Peele. Yeah. Even James Cameron, although I'm not sure if we'll meet him. Yeah, I can't remember the other ones. But anyway, there's a whole bunch. So they'll meet up with them, and then they'll need to heist a series of valuable jewels from the Tower of London, just like the Matthews family ancestor John Cabot did to free Prince Richard, a.k.a. Perkin Warbeck. And then I think they return to Fromland through a portal in the air, like a window in the air, perhaps near Cape Race Lighthouse. Sorry. I think I might be coming down with something. Anyway, so they come down. I think that this portal may be near Cape Race Lighthouse. And when they return to Fromland, maybe like Tabitha's dream, where she's like walking backwards and the town's empty, everyone's gone because they've all either died or time traveled. Okay. Second last part, guys. Don't worry. These are a lot quicker. All right. Part 8. So in each timeline, the 7 beings currently trapped in Fromland, They take on the mythological aspects of the fairy tales, religions, and ghost stories told by those visiting their island, in this case, Newfoundland, and these are mapped out in the key I share below. So there's multiple timelines that are even earlier than John Cabot. So I'll run through the historical ones here before it turns to mythology. So I'm going to write this section in historical order. You can see I've laid it out here, the evolution of the beings across mythologies and history, all related to Newfoundland and a mysterious island. It starts off in Viking Vinland. And you can see all the characters, I think, that will take part. So Leif Erikson discovers Vinland using a crystal sunstone to navigate around 1000 AD and builds a church near a swamp there, making wine from local rowan berries. Later, that's why it became known as Vineland, because of the berries on the vines. Later, Thorfinn, can't pronounce it, and Freydis lead an expedition to Vinland. So, all right, you know what? I'm not going to read all this, but basically what happens is the stories from Greenland's sagas involving Vinland, those stories are told in a sort of weird and corrupted way to recreate what happens in the origin story of Fromland. But all you really need to know is that Freydis Erikson, using a sacrificial Viking ritual involving cutting children or lambs' throats, sprinkling blood everywhere, maybe a sort of boar or a pig of some kind, maybe a goat. Anyway, look, you can read it all through here. You can pause it and read it if you like. I'm not going to go through it because my throat's starting to hurt. But ultimately, Freydis does this ritual that traps the boogeyman, and then Cabot's people accidentally cut down a tree and release it. And I think that she traps the boogeyman in this case with an ask cauldron that has the remains of rowan seeds inside it. And then the tree grows out of the cauldron and surrounds the boogeyman and traps him until he's released in the Cabot timeline. I also think, I know this sounds crazy, but I really do think this might happen. If they do represent this, it may be that the survivors of all these events, they leave on a vessel, they're captured by the English, and a corrupt version of their story is written by Ethelred the Unready of England, and eventually becomes the story of Beowulf. So I actually think this will be a combination of Greenland sagas and the Beowulf sort of mixed together in a sort of unique and interesting way. So next is Dante's comedy. So after Vinland, Dante, he writes about visiting hell, heaven, and purgatory in Inferno, Paradiso, and Purgatorio. And it says that he went to this mysterious island. So I think in this case, he goes to an island, he walks the circles of hell, he meets these 7 beings who are like all these different characters from various mythologies that they've already been. And yeah, they here it is. It's basically they're inserting this so that everyone who said they're in heaven, hell, they're in purgatory, they can technically be right. I think that what they want to do is to have as many people say, well, I was partly right as possible. So the people who think this is Viking mythology, they're going to say they were right. The people who have Greek mythology, they're going to say they were right. I even think Tony Teflon's going to be able to say he was right because some of the beings will arrive from space in a meteor. We'll see. All right. So they'll retell Dante's story. I also don't know why, but for some reason, I think... Oh, no, it's not him. All right. Anyway, so then we run through this history. Oh my God, this theory is so long. I kind of understand why people don't want to read it. Anyway, so look, the Cathars are a religious sect who are persecuted and massacred by the Catholic Church's Inquisition in 1254. And I think in this story, they seek refuge in Scotland, just like the Templar do, 30 years later. And they hide out with the Sinclair family because the Pope's influence did not reach Scotland at this time for some reason. I can't remember why. And interestingly, the Cathar clergy, they were known as perfects or perfecti. So later, the Knights Templar, they have a similar fate where they're accused of heresy in 1307, and they join the Sinclairs. It's believed that that 18 ships bearing the first ever Jolly Roger flag sailed out of France, escaping persecution. That they took refuge in Scotland in secret. That they took part in the Battle of Bannockburn as a thank you for Scotland protecting them from the Church. And on his deathbed. And then interestingly, I think on his deathbed in 1329, King Robert the Bruce of Scotland commands his friend, Sir James Douglas, to cut out his heart when he died and carry it on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Douglas, along with the Sinclairs of Rosslyn, who the Templar supposedly hid out with, and maybe the Cathars too, he set out and joined the Battle of Tiber, where he and where Douglas and Sinclair were killed. And in this story, I think the Sinclairs, they recover Bruce's heart, they take it back to Scotland, and they keep it for themselves, returning a fake. And I think this heart makes its way to Newfoundland, which I'll come on to in a bit. So anyway, the Sinclairs also participated in the Alexandrian Crusade led by Peter I of Cyprus. And during the sack of Alexandria, Alexandria is where Cleopatra and Mark Antony's tombs, they shared a tomb, and apparently it was somewhere in Alexandria, and it's never been found. It's a big mystery. In fact, even in my Contender series, I mentioned this tomb. And so during this sacking of Alexandria, I think the Sinclairs find the tomb, and they plunder Cleopatra's pearl earring, Tivoli's mummified cat, Tivoli her mummified cat, her evil eye charm, which is why we see that being used in emojis by the actor so often, and Mark Antony's signet ring depicting Bacchus, which has an even older history as well. Okay, so and you can see here, and for some reason, I don't know why, Chaucer, the English writer Chaucer, accompanies them on this trip, as well as Euphemia II of Ross. I don't know why, but they come too. So anyways, sorry, let me get into this. So in 1398, this guy called Henry Sinclair, so remember, he's a descendant of all these Sinclairs here who have gathered all these objects, right, and helped the Templar. He was a Scandinavian nobleman and explorer, and he, according to rumor, journeyed to Newfoundland, sailing from the Orkney Islands with 13 ships, and he was rumored to be accompanied by 2 Italian explorers called the Zeno brothers, and also a knight friend of his called Sir James Gunn, a knight. He came too, as well as Chaucer and Euphemia II, like I said. Their expedition has the first ever Thanksgiving with the Micmac after witnessing a burning hill, and at some point they encounter the 7 beings in the form of various demons. The Micmac may keep a Templar battle flag. Sinclair brings with him the last of the Templar and Cathar treasures, hides it in a sea cave beside a waterfall in Newfoundland. These include, just read through them if you like, various sort of religious artifacts. Centuries later, William Sinclair builds Rosslyn Chapel of Da Vinci fame, which features carvings of American corn and other clues. And I think maybe Frommerly will go to this chapel and actually solve the clues, and it will point them to Newfoundland. So this chapel's been associated with legends and mysteries, including those related to the Knights Templar and hidden treasures. Centuries later, Bridget and her friends will find this cave and plunder it and use it for various purposes. So this white cloth will be used for a wedding dress. This ring will be used for a wedding ring. This string will be used for a violin string, that sort of thing. These objects in each timeline evolve too, and they go even back further. So I'll cover the earlier time in the next segment, but you can see here how these things pass backwards across time. Great, we're nearing the end now. This is the last section, guys. So here we go. Part 9. So giving the shoehorning of Dante's Heaven, Hell, and Purgatory, I feel like the showrunners may want everyone to be able to claim they were partially right, even the aliens crowd. And I think the show takes a lot from Stephen King's It, which arrived from space in a meteor. So I think we might see some of the beings arriving in a meteor on primordial Earth. If Tony Teflon, he has said, I have checked with him, he will not eat the hot chip if the beings arrive by meteor. Even if they're fallen angels, he still thinks they count as aliens. So there you go. And I don't blame him. That's cool. Technically, you are right. I would think of it as an alien, and by those same standards, I would, support it. So anyway, so this is the full timeline. What I believe is a full solve of the show, basically, outside of those object lists, those like writers and scientists and things that I showed earlier. I believe this is what a full solve of the show looks like, with a lot more detail of the characters here in the Tudor Newfoundland section. And these are all the mythologies that predate the Viking Vinland section. So yeah, sorry. So I imagine a corrupted and conflated version of the mythologies below will be shown in a fast narrated montage as the 7 beings evolve across time in various archetypal religious figures and myth monsters. I'll try to synthesize the original mythologies together below, but it will likely be a much more simple, conflated version. But I'll show you what like the actual research says happened, and then you can decide how much they take from it. Okay, so in the lore of Fromm, the Garden of Eden is in Newfoundland. There, the first woman, Lilith, created from the same soil as Adam, refuses to sleep with Adam and leaves Eden despite attempts by 3 angels, Raphael, Sariel, and Shamsiel, who try to stop her. They follow her out, becoming fallen angels. This trio will end up representing multiple trios across multiple mythologies, becoming the Fates, the Gorgons, etc. Lilith mates with the serpent/devil, also known as Azazel, After it gives her an emerald from its brow, and she gives birth to Cain, as well as other children who will become known as the Lilin. These are the monsters on the show. As punishment, Lilith's children are killed, and those that survive become demonic. This is real mythology here that I'm repeating. Although Cain was not associated with them. But I think in this case, Cain, she hides him in Eden near the Cave of Treasures and the Tree of Life, and she's adopted or stolen by Adam and Eve. Sorry, Cain is adopted or stolen by Adam and Eve, who was made from Adam's rib. That's why there's references to ribs on the show, as their first son. The serpent convinces Adam and Eve to eat the forbidden fruit. They're kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and they receive a bunch of objects and gifts from both the devil and God. A red snake skin for the devil may also feature. I think that's what the book's wrapped in. Now, Cain, who, according to legend, was prone to seizures, grows up with his brother Abel, who's probably not his real brother. When God unless it's Cain and Abel twins, and they're both left in, and they're both the children of Lilith. When God favors Abel's offerings over meat over Cain's fruit and berries, Cain becomes jealous and kills Abel in a fit of rage, drinking his blood, just like the vampire references. Shamsiel, one of the fallen angels, who takes the form of a raven in this case, helps him bury the body. This is, again, part of Cain's mythology. God, but like Jewish sort of apocryphal mythology in this case. God curses Cain to wander the earth with a protective mark, and as John Milton once wrote, to be forever changing names. According to legend, the mark of Cain was a Canaanite tetragrammation symbol called He. This symbol is misspelled that. This symbol is the F symbol on the show, but mirrored facing the wrong way, because US Fromland is a mirror version of the Canadian Fromland. So if you look up the Phoenician Canaanite tetragrammation symbol for He, it looks very much like the sign for that we see on the show. And interestingly, that is what the Jewish apocryphal texts say, that the mark of Cain was the symbol He, and it makes sense that it would be a Canaanite symbol because that's the earliest civilization associated with that religion, I believe. Okay, so anyway, every being on the show has a symbol associated with them. The boogeyman says the sable Jade keeps seeing. It's the mark of Cain. It's the reversed F. If someone hurts Cain, it comes back sevenfold. That's a part of the mythology for him as well. This is why he gains the powers of things that hurt him. So the roots, the cicadas, and the worms, he's cursed with these things. The roots keep him trapped. These are Bridget's tree roots. The cicadas and the worms, he was cursed by Caroline Dye, and now they're part of his powers. So I think that's part of his mythology. Cain may also grow a horn or horns, one of which will be broken off to become a horn instrument. Later, Cain fakes his death when his house collapses on him. Again, this is part of Cain's mythology. Isn't it interesting that Jim's house collapses on him, and so does Cain's, and he starts a new life. He moves to the land of Canaan, founded by his son of the same name, and is worshipped as the bull god Baal. Okay, so then there's a whole Noah section. Basically, I think the sea monster is a product of incest. And again, this is according to apocryphal religious texts that are sort of pseudo-scientific, pseudo-real. God chose Noah to survive the coming flood with his wife Namar. I think in this case, Lilith pretends to be Namar. She possesses her in some way or shapeshifts to look like her. They build the ark, Noah's ark. There's a picture of Noah's ark on Ethan's trailer poster, by the way, one of the stickers. And he gathered his sons, including Ham, who's secretly Cain in disguise, and their families. They bring aboard all these animals, and during the flood, Noah sends out a crow, Shamsiel, and a dove, Sariel, to find land. These are the fallen angels in the form of animals. They return with an olive branch, and they go to Mount Ararat, which basically appears as an island. I think these become the Turn Gap Mountains in northeast Canada at some point. But anyway, whatever. So Noah builds an altar. He does these sacrifices. Noah plants a vineyard, grew some grapes. Namar, Noah's wife, plays the cymbal like a tambourine. Anyway, this is how I think it happens. Ham, who's secretly Cain, he sees Namar, his mother, Lilith, that he doesn't know she's his mother, and sees Noah naked. Overcome by his dark desires, Cain sleeps with Lilith, resulting in the birth of Canaan. When Noah discovered what had happened, he cursed Canaan, condemning him and his bloodline to servitude. Ham's descendants, including Saint Canaan, settle in the promised land. So do you see how this all works, right? It's all biblical. God called Abraham to leave Ur and go to Canaan. Okay, so now, and then she has these three. So this is where the spider comes in. This is the other being, is Sarah from the Bible. So I will read this bit and then I'm going to skim the rest because it's just me repeating what happens in the Bible, basically. God called Abraham to leave Ur and go to Canaan. Abraham and his wife Sarah hosted 3 divine guests who promised them a son. this becomes Isaac. God, they prepare a special meal. God tested Abraham's face by asking him to sacrifice his son Isaac, but then a ram, Azazel, appeared in Isaac's place. So, basically these 7 beings, they basically cameo as various animals and characters in these biblical times. And then it goes through like Egypt and Joseph's multicolored dream coat and all these things. And it goes on and on. Then we get to Greece. So remember, Baal, the bull god, who was worshipped by the Canaanites, who later became the Phoenicians. Now he's no longer a bull god, but the Minotaur, trapped by the enemy of the Phoenicians, the Greek king Minos' king, and he's trapped in a labyrinth. And then it basically recreates all of the Greek mythologies, right? So you can see here how each of them becomes a different mythological being from Greek mythology. And these objects have also come across time. This is where the Minotaur loses a horn, I think, and where Icarus's wings come from, where Pegasus comes from, where Ariadne's thread, which is later used as Odysseus's bowstring, which is later used as John Blank's violin string. I think Circe is involved here. Anyway, and I think Hercules is also involved here, which is, connects to the 7 labors of Rostam in the Yaldanite that I was telling you about earlier. So then we get to another, there's 2 Greek timelines. It's kind of crazy. It took me ages to figure this out. For ages, I was like, what is this? Or how can it be this and that? I think it has 2 different Greek timelines. So various things from the Garden of Eden become Greek things now. So the Garden of Hesperides, the garden becomes the Garden of Hesperides, that sort of thing. It's also interesting that Odysseus has this person called Cassandra, who's an oracle cursed to have never be believed, despite making accurate predictions. I gotta say, if I do turn out to be right, I'm gonna empathize with her a lot, because I think there's very few people in the world right now who don't think that I've just lost my mind and have just written like a crazy fan fiction, but also somehow become convinced that the fan fiction is true and that I'm slightly unstable. I think that's kind of the current assessment of what's going on among most people. And I accept that, because this is crazy. Like, me reading through it, I'm just like, wow, it goes on and on and on, and there's so much, and how can I possibly be right? How can they possibly fit this into the remaining 4 seasons of the show? I think there's going to be 6 seasons. Anyway, Odysseus goes on a voyage, becomes lost, and we see all of this stuff with Odysseus. What's interesting is, we see people with one eye all the time on the show. So I think this is related to Polyphemus, who's Cain in this case, who gets blinded by Odysseus. I think he actually just loses one eye, and then later he becomes Odin, who has an eye patch and only has one eye, etc. And also, interestingly, when Randall says and that Jim is a P word on the playground, technically Polyphemus, Polyphemus's mythology makes him a P word. So that's what that clue means. It's just so anyone who's searching the P word and mythology, I've saved your internet search history. That is what the answer is, in my opinion. Anyway, it goes on and on, different beings across different times. We eventually end up in Israeli sort of mythology with King Solomon, the Witch of Endor, Jezebel of Tyre, who gets pushed out a window, just like Tabitha does in her mythology. Then we get Mark Antony and Cleopatra's story told. There'll be Egyptian gods in this time. There'll be various, a mummified cat, a pearl earring, a ring, a battle standard. This battle standard eventually becomes the wounded eagle from Napoleon that I mentioned earlier. And here's the island of Punt, that was an Egyptian mythological island. And then later, Henry Sinclair recovers these from their graves. Then we actually have an Arthurian Welsh timeline. And all I'll say is here's that Arthur, he's injured and needs to be healed, so he's sent to this magical island. He seeks the Grail, he meets the Lady in the Lake, he battles with a giant and collects the blood of a witch named Ordu in a bottle. And I think that bottle may be the one that Fromland is trapped in. Okay, then we go to this Irish voyage of Malduin and St. Brendan. And this is some super trippy trip that they do in this legend, where they encounter ants and acid rivers and salmon falling from the sky. And for some reason that's in there too. I think it's mostly to get the Irish slua in there at some point, so that all the people guess slua will be correct answer. Finally, I'm going to make a final prediction on what color everyone is. I'm just going to explain my logic here. Who is, why would the Lonely Dragon be orange? Well, I think it's because Victor is the lonely dragon because he's the one with all the maps. And Victor wears orange in season 3, and he mentions the word orange several times. At the same time, Elgin wears a t-shirt with what looks like a red splotch and a yellow splotch, which if you mix them together would make orange when you're mixing paint. It was a toss-up, so I went with orange for the dragon archetype Lilith, but they could be the other way around. I don't know. So anyway, let me finally finish this off. How does it all end? So given people who die in Fromland likely have their souls stored in trees and get to return to the real world at the end of each game, it's likely much of the cast will die by the end of the series, because, they all get to come back to life at the end. If you die in Fromland, you get stored in a tree and you can still come back to life afterwards. So, I think, I don't know when they're going to reveal that, but it will come through at some point. So as with the other timelines, it will end with a soldier archetype, Boyd in this case, and a witch archetype, either Tabitha, Donna, or both, battling the boogeyman, armed with all these artifacts that I've mentioned, which we'll see quested for in later seasons, probably season 4. I imagine the final climax will echo the story Julie told in the first episode, where Julie is dying from claw marks as Ethan cries, and the secret fairies, aka the monsters, are closing in from their lair in the Lake of Tears. I also think echoing the ending of Lost, because remember, Jack Bender and Jeff Pinkner, I've seen interviews with Jack Bender, and he was complaining how, Lost's ending is highlighted as one of the worst endings of Lost, and he directed that ending, and he said, look, I think people didn't understand it. He thought it was a good ending. And to be honest, like when I rewatched Lost and I realized like at what point they probably told the writers that they needed to wrap it up and tie up all the loose ends, it kind of made sense. I didn't like the flash sideways very much. I thought that was kind of dumb. But outside of that, I liked it. So I think they're gonna do the same ending as Lost, but this time it will make sense. So I think many of the dead characters might reunite with loved ones in one crowded scene, even maybe in a church. It could be the church that they all meet in, and then they make a journey to the next place together, in this case being brought back to life and returning to the real world. So, okay, final thoughts. Thank you for anyone who's stuck with me this whole time. There's not many images to look at for like a huge chunk of it. I was looking at the wrong presentation on my screen share. So, I forgive you for not listening to me all the way through, but, I'll be very excited to share this video if I turn out to be quite right about a few things at the very end in the last season, and people can watch it and be like, wow, he got a lot right, at season 2. He basically solved it at season 2. We'll see. So anyway, so at the heart of From lies a mystery that spans time, mythology, and the human psyche. My theory is an attempt to weave together the seemingly disconnected threads of history, folklore, and character arcs into a cohesive explanation of the show's deeper narrative. While there are bound to be inaccuracies and dead ends, the joy in constructing this series has been in the exploration itself, delving into hidden clues, dissecting Chekhov's guns, and tracing the origins of world mythologies that may shape the future of the show. Ultimately, From presents itself not only as a story of humanity's resilience, but as a puzzle that invites us to look beyond the surface and into the roots of our myths, legends, and collective unconscious. Whether the series proves right or wrong in the long run, the journey of discovery, much like the character's journey in Fromland, is where the real reward lies. From challenges us to question, to wonder, and to explore, and that in itself is the essence of a great story. I look forward to seeing how it all unfolds, and if this theory sparks discussion or inspires others to dig deeper, then it will have served its purpose. And if you made it all the way to the end, I thank you for reading. I'm also going to quickly delve into where to find me. While I will continue to be found on Reddit, I probably will not be posting as often going forward, as I have to set my theory in stone sometime. Last edit is the 21st of December. I might make a few tweaks today, but they're just going to be correcting grammar, basically. You can visit my YouTube channel, where I will soon visit Providence and Newfoundland with YouTuber and filmmaker Real Enigmas and Theories. There we will document our visits and make videos about From. In this theory, I've tried to follow the digital footsteps John Griffin took while researching since 9/11. In the videos and these documentaries, we hope to retrace his real steps, and even those steps that actors from the show may make in coming seasons filming future scenes. You can follow our journey here on my YouTube channel. This is also where I'll be doing lives, Q&As, and video presentations where I explain the clues and reasoning that led me to this theory. It's going to take me many, many hours to get through, and I'll probably only do it as things come up on the show. So if I'm correct about something, I'll do a video explaining how I knew what I knew, but I won't explain things until they come up on the show. I think that's probably the best way to do it. Yeah, that's how I plan on doing it. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention I'm a New York Times and Sunday Times bestselling author who's written 10 books. You can find them in any Barnes & Noble or Amazon or Waterstones in the UK, or your mainstream bookstores in 17 languages around the world. I'm best known for my Summoner series, which might be described as Harry Potter meets Lord of the Rings meets Pokemon. And I also wrote the From-like Contender series, Gladiator meets Lost, and also Dragon Rider, Game of Thrones meets Aragon. So if you like the From like mystery, where it has a different answer, and you're a big history buff, you may enjoy the Contender series. You can learn more on my website here, www.authortaranmatharu.com. Okay. All right. So I have now finished doing my theory. I hope that it will hit publish. I hope it will publish and I haven't just wasted all my time. I'm not very good at YouTube, as you guys can tell. So yeah, I'm looking at the comments now. Let's go through the comments quickly for the people who, wow, 3 hours and 43 minutes. That was twice as long as I thought it would take. And I skimmed through a lot of it. So yeah, I get why people aren't reading this. I'm going to have to work my way through this as things become correct, perhaps, if I am right. I'm probably not about most things. All right. So people want to see time travel, Gothica, Chick 4. You were right about Tabby being in Maine. Oh, cool. Okay. I think that was kind of established already. Julie was wearing a heart sweater. Yes. Hi, Debbie. Nice to see you. They say Camden, Maine last night. And I screamed, come on, Stephen King. Oh my God, I didn't know you predicted a clown. I predicted an evil clown for this season. Oh, interesting. I also think a clown will appear. So many of us have the same theories. Interesting. If not Gaiman, what about Alan Moore? I don't know. Could be. It depends on if he was friends with the director, Tim Burton. What an intense episode. Loved it. Great. I can't wait to read it. I'll watch it even. Where did you find the info on Bridget of York being a witch? I couldn't find anything on that, and her giving birth. So Bridget of York, there's a if you look in the footnotes of Wikipedia, you'll see that there's a rumor that she gave birth to a girl called Agnes of Eltham illegitimately, and if you research it, you'll find that Agnes of Eltham was married to a man who was the main bodyguard of a noble called the Shepherd Lord, and then you can also learn about the fact that the Shepherd Lord had several poems written about him involving women. And so you can make the assumption that the Shepherd Lord in this case is the one who taught Bridget all her witchcraft. Have you got Anjin in your theory? I don't, sorry. Could they all be in a bottle or a lamp? I mean, there's a lot of references to genius, which for a while I thought meant genie in a bottle. And I think it is very much like a genie in the bottle. And maybe there's an Iranian sort of part to this that I haven't discovered, but there's so many timelines already. Like if they keep adding more, I'm sorry, John Griffin, you're just hedging your bets at this point and you're not going to show all of them. Which is a breach of the contract that we agree, this contract that you said you have with all the people watching, that everything will get an answer. If you only pick, if you leave clues for everything and you only pick and choose a few things, then I feel you're cheating personally. What more clues? What does everyone think of the scarecrows? I think they're hoodoo and Condi dolls left by Caroline Dye. Okay. Just spoilers for season 3, episode 1. I'm just going to kind of skim through them. I like the tarot theory. Hopefully we'll see more clues of tarot in the season. I hope so too. I think we will. They released a video that leaked early, but then they tweaked it a little and then released it again, where Tilly does a tarot card reading, it looks like, for Fatima, before a crow bursts through the window. So I will be interested to see if that happens. My God, I'm looking very beardy and unkempt right now. I started this video, I stayed up quite late last night, working on this theory and joining a live with Real Enigmas and Theories and Tony Teflon. So, I haven't had a chance to sleep or shower. I just wanted to get this video out as soon as possible. Had no idea it was going to take 4 hours of my day. My gosh. Okay, I think that's all. Have a good trip to Canada. Thank you, Andrew. All right, I'm going to leave it there. So yeah, for anyone who's listened all the way through, thank you. For the second section where I forgot to switch my screen, apologies. I hope it doesn't make everyone drop off before they get to the next section. But yeah, look, I may be wrong. I'm probably wrong about a lot of things, but I do feel like this will probably be the closest anyone will get to a full solve. And that may sound super arrogant, but it's how I feel. It's my assessment of my theory. And, if I have to say what I think, I have to be honest. So I hope people enjoyed watching this. I imagine not too many people did or will. And I'll have to just send people links to the sections that I get right as they come right, if they are right. We'll see. All right, everyone. So take it easy. Thanks very much. Bye bye.